Alright, let's dive into the first chapter of the immortal life of Henrietta Lacks, and I'll share it with you like I'm telling a story. So, we start in January 1951. Henrietta Lacks is a young African-American woman, only 31 years old. She's sitting in the waiting room at Johns Hopkins Hospital, a place that treated black patients even though it was still very much a segregated world. She's there because she's been feeling a painful knot in her womb, something that's been worrying her for a while. She's a bit nervous, but she's been through a lot in life, so she's tough. Henrietta tells the receptionist she has a knot inside her. For over a year she'd been telling her closest friends and family that something didn't feel right. They all advised her to get it checked out, but you know how it is, life gets busy, and maybe she was scared of what she might find out. Plus, medical care wasn't as accessible or as understood by everyone back then, especially in poorer communities. She finally gets in to see the gynecologist, Dr. Howard Jones. When he examines her, he finds something unusual, a hard lump on her cervix. It's shiny and purple, like grape jello, and so delicate it bleeds at the slightest touch. Dr. Jones takes a biopsy, a small tissue sample, to send to the lab. Now, what's really wild is that at this same time, a doctor named Richard Tellende, one of the top cervical cancer experts in the country, was working at Johns Hopkins. He believed that a certain type of cervical cancer, which many doctors thought was harmless and didn't need aggressive treatment, actually was dangerous. He needed proof, so he was collecting tissue samples from patients at Hopkins, including Henrietta, without their knowledge. This was a common practice at the time, especially in public wards where many poor black patients were treated for free. It was a way doctors justified using their patients in research. So, back to Henrietta. After the biopsy, she's diagnosed with epidermoid carcinoma of the cervix, which is a type of cervical cancer. This news is heavy, but Henrietta doesn't let on to her family how serious it might be. She's the kind of person who carries her burdens quietly, always keeping a strong front for her children and husband, Day. A few days later, Henrietta returns to the hospital for her first treatment. This is where things get really intense. The treatment for cervical cancer at the time was radium therapy. Radium is radioactive, and it was used because it can kill cancer cells. The doctors pack radium tubes inside Henrietta's cervix and sew them in place. This sounds so archaic now, but back then it was cutting-edge medicine. Henrietta has to stay in the hospital for a few days to recover from the procedure. She's in a lot of discomfort, but she doesn't complain. Meanwhile, without her knowing, the tissue sample taken from her cervix is sent to the lab of a researcher named George Gay. Gay has been trying to grow human cells outside the body for decades, hoping to find a way to study cancer and other diseases. Most cells they've tried to culture die quickly, but they're hoping Henrietta's cells will be different. And they are. Henrietta's cells start to do something amazing. They don't die. Instead, they double every 20 to 24 hours, which is incredibly fast. They keep growing and growing. This is unheard of. These cells are what become known as HeLa cells, named after the first two letters of Henrietta's first and last name. So to give you some context on why this is so important, most cells from other human tissues might survive a few days if you're lucky, but HeLa cells are effectively immortal. They can be kept alive and growing indefinitely, as long as they have the right conditions. This discovery is monumental because it means researchers can now perform all sorts of experiments that weren't possible before, accelerating medical research dramatically. While Henrietta is back home, unaware of her cell's incredible journey, her life is getting more complicated. The treatments are taking a toll on her body, and she's dealing with the pain and the worry of what's to come. But she doesn't let it show. She keeps taking care of her family, cooking, cleaning, and being the backbone they all rely on. It's a heavy chapter because it sets up this huge contrast: Henrietta's life, full of ordinary struggles and extraordinary pain, and the almost miraculous scientific breakthrough her cells represent. There's a lot of ethical questions here too, which the book explores later on about consent, race, and medical ethics. Henrietta never knew her cells were taken and used for research. She never saw any of the incredible advancements her cells made possible, nor did her family benefit from them. And that's just the beginning. The first chapter really draws you in with Henrietta's personal story, making you feel her strength and resilience while hinting at the massive impact her cells will have on science and medicine. It's both a tribute to her life and an introduction to the ethical dilemmas that will unfold as her story continues. So moving on from the intense opening chapter, we delve into the second chapter of the immortal life of Henrietta Lacks, which shifts the scene to Henrietta's childhood in Clover, Virginia. Born as Loretta Pleasant on August 1, 1920, In Roanoke, Virginia, Henrietta later becomes known as Henrietta Lacks. Her early life is painted vividly with the harsh realities and communal bonds of rural, segregated America. After Henrietta's mother, Eliza, dies giving birth to her 10th child, her father, Johnny Pleasant, unable to cope with the responsibility, takes the children to Clover, where they are distributed among relatives. Henrietta ends up with her grandfather, Tommy Lacks, in a log cabin that once served as slave quarters. This home house, perched on a hill, is rustic and rough, with wind blowing through the cracks and the constant cool air serving as a natural preservation for deceased relatives before burial. Growing up, Henrietta shares the home with her cousin, David Lacks, known as Day. The Lacks family history is steeped in the legacy of slavery and the post-slavery sharecropping life that many African Americans in the South endured. The family worked the same tobacco fields their ancestors had, struggling to make a living in a system that offered little change from the conditions of slavery. Henrietta and Day grow up close, their lives intertwined in the daily routines of farm work, school, and community activities. The children in the family are responsible for a variety of chores, including fetching water from the creek and helping in the fields. Henrietta, with her strong sense of responsibility, quickly becomes a central figure in the family, known for her hard work and caring nature. The chapter gives a detailed account of the social and familial structures of the time. The home house is a gathering place where stories are told and traditions are maintained. Family and community are crucial, providing a support system in an otherwise harsh and unforgiving world. Henrietta's early years are marked by the rigors of farm life and the close-knit nature of the Lacks family. The children entertain themselves with simple pleasures, such as damming the creek to create a swimming hole, playing games, and attending the local church, which serves as both a religious and social hub. These activities create a sense of normalcy and joy amidst the labor-intensive lifestyle. As she grows older, Henrietta's beauty and strong personality stand out. She is known for her full lips, walnut eyes, and a warm smile that seems to invite friendship and trust. Her appearance and demeanor draw attention, making her a beloved figure in the community. Henrietta's relationship with Day transitions from a familial bond to a romantic one, and they start a family of their own at a young age. Their first child, Lawrence, is born when Henrietta is just 14, followed by Elsie 4 years later. Despite the challenges, Henrietta's resilience and dedication to her family shine through. The chapter paints a picture of a woman deeply rooted in her community and family, whose strength and character would leave a lasting impact long after her death. The close bonds and shared experiences of the Lacks family are a testament to their resilience and solidarity in the face of systemic hardships and personal tragedies. This chapter sets the stage for understanding Henrietta's background, the environment that shaped her, and the cultural and familial influences that defined her life. It's a poignant reminder of the human stories behind scientific advancements, grounding the extraordinary journey of Henrietta's cells in the very ordinary and relatable struggles of life in rural Virginia during the early 20th century. Henrietta's story, as introduced in this chapter, is one of endurance, familial love, and the unbreakable spirit of a woman who, despite the limitations and struggles imposed by society, remains a central, vital figure in her community and family. This foundation is crucial for appreciating the profound impact her cells would later have on the world, highlighting the contrast between her humble beginnings and the vast scientific legacy she unknowingly left behind. So in the third chapter of the immortal life of Henrietta Lacks, titled Diagnosis and Treatment, the story continues to unfold with Henrietta going back to her usual life after her visit to Johns Hopkins Hospital. She's cooking, cleaning, and taking care of her family, all the while keeping the reality of her condition to herself. It's just a few days later that Dr. Howard Jones receives the biopsy results from the lab, confirming that Henrietta has epidermoid carcinoma of the cervix, stage 1. Now, it's important to understand the background of cervical cancer research at that time. Most cervical cancers are carcinomas, originating from the epithelial cells that cover the cervix. Henrietta's case comes at a crucial moment when Dr. Richard Day, a leading expert in the field, is in the midst of a significant debate over how to classify and treat cervical cancer. Day, a distinguished surgeon known for his pioneering work, believes that carcinoma in situ, a non-invasive form of cervical cancer, is actually an early stage of invasive carcinoma. He argues that if left untreated, carcinoma in situ would eventually become deadly. This was a controversial stance because, at the time, many in the medical community thought that only invasive carcinoma was life-threatening and treated it aggressively, while carcinoma in situ was often left alone. Telendi's theory was crucial for many reasons. He was pushing for more aggressive treatment of what was then considered a non-threatening condition. He advocated for removing the cervix, uterus, and parts of the vagina in women diagnosed with carcinoma in situ to prevent it from becoming invasive. His critics thought this was extreme and unnecessary. Diagnosing carcinoma in situ had only become possible in 1941, thanks to the development of the Pap smear by George Papanicolaou, which allowed doctors to detect precancerous cells through microscopic examination. This Pap smear was a game changer. Before its development, there was no way to detect these cells because they didn't cause any symptoms and weren't visible to the naked eye. By the time a woman showed symptoms, the cancer was often too advanced to treat effectively. With the Pap smear, doctors could catch and treat these cells early, theoretically preventing cervical cancer. However, there were obstacles. Many women, especially in poorer communities, didn't get the test, and even when they did, many doctors didn't know how to interpret the results correctly. Henrietta's diagnosis comes right into the thick of Telendi's efforts to prove his theory. He needed tissue samples to study the progression from carcinoma in situ to invasive cancer. Hopkins, with its large population of indigent patients, provided plenty of clinical material for research, which was often used without patient consent, a common practice at the time. This is how Henrietta's cells ended up in Dr. George Gay's lab. Dr. Guy was a passionate researcher determined to grow the first immortal human cells. For years, he and his team had been trying to grow human cells outside the body, but they always died after a few divisions. They needed a line of cells that could keep dividing indefinitely, which would be invaluable for medical research. When Henrietta went to Hopkins for her treatment, she signed an operation permit allowing the doctors to perform any procedures they deemed necessary. This was a standard form that didn't specifically mention taking tissue samples for research. She was then taken to the colored women's ward, where she underwent more tests than she had ever had in her life. The doctors tested her urine, blood, and lungs, inserted tubes into her bladder and nose, and prepared her for her first radium treatment, the standard treatment for invasive cervical cancer at the time. Radium is a radioactive metal that glows blue and was hailed as a miracle cure when it was first discovered. It was used to treat various conditions, but it turned out to be incredibly dangerous, causing mutations and cancer at high doses. However, it was effective at killing cancer cells. At Hopkins, they used radium to treat cervical cancer by placing radium plaques directly on the cervix. On the day of her first treatment, a taxi driver delivered a bag filled with thin glass tubes of radium to the hospital. These tubes were placed inside small canvas pouches called Brack plaques, named after the Hopkins doctor who invented them. The pouches were then inserted into Henrietta's cervix and sewn in place. Additional plaques were placed on the outside of her cervix, and her vagina was packed with gauze to keep the radium in place. The procedure was standard, and Henrietta tolerated it well, but she had no idea that tissue samples were also taken from her tumor and healthy cervical tissue. These samples were sent to Dr. Gay's lab, where his team, including his young assistant Mary Kubishek, were trying to grow cells. Everyone in the lab was used to seeing samples fail to thrive, but Henrietta's cells were different. They not only survived but began to multiply rapidly. These cells, which would become known as HeLa cells, were the first immortal human cells ever grown in a lab. Henrietta's life continued with this new burden of treatments and the secret of her illness. She didn't tell anyone, trying to spare her family the worry. Her treatments seemed to be working initially, and her doctors were optimistic. But the reality was harsh. Henrietta's condition began to worsen, and her pain increased. She kept going back to the hospital, but her prognosis was grim. The doctors found that her cancer was more aggressive than they had initially thought. This chapter highlights the juxtaposition of Henrietta's personal struggles and the scientific breakthroughs her cells would facilitate. The story raises ethical questions about consent and the treatment of Black patients in segregated America. Henrietta's cells would go on to contribute to countless medical advancements, but she would never know the impact she had. The complexity of her story lies in the contrast between her quiet, painful fight for life and the monumental scientific legacy she left behind. Henrietta's story is not just about a woman who unknowingly contributed to science. It's about the intersection of race, medical ethics, and scientific progress. Her cells helped pave the way for numerous medical advancements, including the development of the polio vaccine, cancer research, and many other fields. Yet Henrietta herself was treated with the casual disregard typical of the time for Black patients, especially those in public wards. As we follow Henrietta through her diagnosis and treatment, we see a resilient woman trying to manage her health and family responsibilities. The chapter encapsulates a critical period in medical history and personal perseverance, setting the stage for the incredible scientific journey that her cells would embark on, forever changing the landscape of medical research. So let's dive into the fourth chapter of the immortal life of Henrietta Lacks, where the story of HeLa cells really begins to take off. This chapter, titled The Birth of HeLa, takes us into the heart of the scientific world at Johns Hopkins, focusing on the moment when Henrietta's cells started doing something extraordinary. We're in George Gay's lab now. He's the scientist who's been trying to grow human cells outside the body for decades. He's got a team of researchers working with him, including his assistant Mary Kubicek. On this particular day, Mary is sitting at her bench, probably a bit tired and definitely a bit skeptical. She's dealt with countless cell samples before, and they almost always die. But today, things are different. Mary is eating her lunch when Gay walks in with the sample from Henrietta. He tells her to put it in her cubicle, but Mary, worn out from the repetitive and often disappointing work, doesn't rush. She finishes her sandwich before finally getting to the sample. When she does, she follows the usual procedure, placing the cells into culture medium, which is supposed to nourish and sustain them. As days go by, something incredible happens. Instead of dying, Henrietta's cells begin to multiply rapidly. They double every 20 to 24 hours. This is a huge deal because, up until this point, no one has been able to keep human cells alive in culture for very long. The cells not only survive but thrive, growing at a pace that astonishes everyone in the lab. Gay realizes they have something special on their hands. The reason these cells are so important is that they can be used for all sorts of research that would be impossible with a living human. Scientists can expose them to toxins, viruses, and drugs, and study their reactions in ways that were never possible before. This opens up a whole new world of scientific possibilities. HeLa cells, as they come to be known, are essentially immortal. They don't die after a few divisions like other cells. Instead, they continue to grow and divide indefinitely, given the right conditions. As the cells continue to grow, Gay starts sending them out to other researchers. He's incredibly generous with them, sending them to labs all over the country and even around the world. This wasn't typical at the time, but Gay believed in the potential of HeLa cells to advance science in profound ways. He wanted to see how far they could go, how many different areas of research they could impact. One of the early uses of HeLa cells was in cancer research. Scientists were desperate to understand how cancer worked, how it spread, and how it could be stopped. With HeLa cells, they could study cancer at the cellular level in ways they'd never been able to before. They could watch the cells grow, mutate, and respond to treatments right under their microscopes. The cells also played a crucial role in the development of the polio vaccine. Jonas Salk, the scientist who developed the first effective polio vaccine, needed a way to test his vaccine on a large scale. Using HeLa cells, scientists were able to grow the polio virus in culture and test the vaccine's effectiveness without using live animals. This was a massive breakthrough that helped bring the polio epidemic under control. But it wasn't just cancer and polio. HeLa cells were used in all sorts of research. They helped scientists understand more about genetics, cloning, and the effects of radiation. They were used to test the first chemotherapy drugs and to study the effects of zero gravity on human cells. The list goes on and on. Guy's lab became a hub of activity. Researchers from all over the world came to learn how to grow and use HeLa cells. Guy himself traveled extensively, teaching others and setting up new cell culture labs. he was tireless in his efforts to spread the knowledge and potential of these cells. What's fascinating is how quickly HeLa cells became a staple of scientific research. In a relatively short time, they were everywhere. Labs were using them to study everything from basic cell biology to complex diseases. They were a tool that made countless experiments possible, experiments that have led to significant medical and scientific advancements. However, despite all the excitement and the groundbreaking research, there was a darker side to the story. Henrietta's cells were taken without her knowledge or consent, which raises ethical questions that are still being debated today. At the time, it was common practice to use patient samples for research without informing the patients, especially in public wards where many poor and minority patients were treated. But as the impact of HeLa cells grew, so did the scrutiny of these practices. Henrietta's family had no idea that her cells were being used in this way. They didn't know that a piece of her was living on in labs around the world, contributing to some of the most important scientific discoveries of the 20th century. It wasn't until years later that they found out, and the revelation was both shocking and painful for them. In the lab, though, the focus was on the science. Guy and his team were captivated by the potential of HeLa cells. They were pushing the boundaries of what was possible in medical research, driven by the promise of new discoveries and the hope of finding cures for devastating diseases. The birth of HeLa cells marked a turning point in science, a moment when the impossible became possible and the legacy of Henrietta Lacks began to unfold. The chapter wraps up with the realization that Henrietta's cells are going to change the world. They're already starting to, and while the ethical considerations are significant, the scientific community is mostly focused on the incredible potential these cells represent. HeLa cells are a miracle of science, and they're just getting started. In the 5th chapter of the Immortal life of Henrietta Lacks, titled Blackness, Be Spreadin' All Inside, we get a closer look at Henrietta's life after her diagnosis and the early days of her treatment. This chapter juxtaposes the relentless progression of her cancer with the vibrant, everyday life she continued to lead, highlighting the stark contrast between her external appearance and the internal devastation caused by the disease. Henrietta's daily life after her initial treatment at Johns Hopkins is painted with a mixture of resilience and normalcy. She returns to her home and family, engaging in activities that bring her joy and a sense of normalcy. She spends her weekends in Clover, working the tobacco fields and churning butter, seemingly unaffected by the nausea and weakness typically associated with radium treatment. Her ability to carry on without showing signs of her suffering is remarkable and speaks volumes about her strength and determination. When Henrietta is not in Clover, she is at home, cooking for her family and hosting relatives and friends. Her cooking is legendary among her loved ones, known for her rice pudding, slow-cooked greens, chitlins, and massive pots of spaghetti with meatballs that are always on the stove for anyone who stops by. Her home is a hub of activity, filled with laughter, music, and the smells of her delicious meals. Evenings are spent playing cards with her husband, Day, and listening to blues on the radio. Yet, despite this semblance of normalcy, Henrietta's condition is worsening. One poignant moment in the chapter is when Henrietta shows her friends Margaret and Sadie the severe burns on her abdomen from the radium treatments. The burns have turned her skin black as tar, a stark reminder of the aggressive nature of both her cancer and its treatment. This visual serves as a harbinger of the spread of her cancer, which she describes as feeling like blackness be spreadin' all inside me. The chapter also touches on Henrietta's trips to local bars and dance halls with her friend Sadie. They wait for Day to leave for his night shift before sneaking out to dance and let loose, embracing moments of joy and freedom despite the gravity of Henrietta's illness. These nights out, filled with music and dancing, offer a temporary escape from the harsh reality of her situation. Sadie recalls these nights fondly, describing the energy and excitement of the dance floors and the beautiful times they had together. Henrietta, with her infectious spirit, was always at the center of the fun, swinging and dancing with abandon. These memories contrast sharply with the image of her suffering and underline the tragedy of her condition. As her treatments continue, Henrietta's cancer spreads rapidly. Despite the initial optimism of her doctors, the reality of her condition becomes apparent as tumors spread throughout her body. The pain becomes unbearable, and her trips to Johns Hopkins become more frequent and more desperate. The medical records from these visits show a stark deterioration in her health, with tumors spreading to her diaphragm, bladder and lungs, blocking her intestines and causing severe swelling and pain. Henrietta's decline is swift and brutal. The medical staff at Johns Hopkins, who once noted her good morale and lack of evident distress, now record her chronic pain and the grim prognosis of her disease. The doctors continue to perform X-rays and administer pain relief, but their notes reflect the inevitability of her condition. The cancer is unstoppable, consuming her body from the inside. Despite her worsening condition, Henrietta's physical appearance does not deteriorate as one might expect. She retains her outward beauty and strength, with only her eyes betraying the severity of her illness. Her friend Sadie notes that while Henrietta's body did not fade, her eyes told a different story, reflecting the pain and the knowledge that she would not survive. This chapter is a poignant portrayal of Henrietta's strength and resilience in the face of unimaginable suffering. It also highlights the stark reality of cancer treatment in the 1950s, the racial disparities in medical care, and the lack of informed consent for patients like Henrietta. Her ability to carry on with her life, to find joy in cooking, dancing, and spending time with loved ones, is a testament to her indomitable spirit. As we delve deeper into Henrietta's story, we see the beginnings of the ethical and moral questions that will arise from the use of her cells in research. Her cells, taken without her knowledge, are growing rapidly in George Gay's lab, setting the stage for groundbreaking scientific discoveries. Yet, Henrietta herself remains unaware of the impact she is having on the world, focusing instead on her family and her fight for life. This chapter sets the stage for the broader narrative of Henrietta's legacy, juxtaposing the personal and intimate details of her life with the monumental scientific advancements her cells will enable. It is a powerful reminder of the human stories behind scientific progress and the need for ethical considerations in medical research. Henrietta's story is not just about the cells that changed the world, but about the woman whose life and suffering gave rise to those cells. All right, let's continue with the story from the next chapter, Ladies on the Phone. So this chapter starts with the author, Rebecca Skloot, tracking down the Lacks family. She's determined to learn more about Henrietta and her cells, and her journey brings her to a symposium at Morehouse School of Medicine in Atlanta. This symposium is dedicated to Henrietta Lacks and is organized by Roland Patillo, a professor who was one of George Gay's few African-American students. Rebecca calls Patillo to see what he knows about Henrietta. Patillo is immediately skeptical and warns Rebecca that the Lacks family has had a rough time dealing with the attention from HeLa cells. He tells her that the family won't talk to her easily, but he hints that he might be able to help. Rebecca, undeterred, pushes forward and manages to get a list of phone numbers from Patillo, including those of Henrietta's daughter, Deborah, and her brothers. She begins calling them daily, leaving messages, but getting no responses. Finally, she reaches someone at Day's house, but it's a young boy who only says yeah, and then yells for Day to come to the phone. When Day finally picks up, he's confused and tired of people asking about his wife's cells. He's had many such calls over the years, mostly from scientists and reporters wanting information or samples. He eventually hangs up on Rebecca, but she doesn't give up. Rebecca's persistence leads her to call Deborah, who at first is reluctant and paranoid, influenced by her brothers who tell her she should write her own book. Deborah's initial conversations with Rebecca are filled with distrust and hesitation, reflecting years of broken promises and exploitation by people seeking to profit from their mother's story. Deborah gives Rebecca phone numbers for her father, her oldest brother Lawrence, and her brother David Jr., known as Sonny. Rebecca's daily calls finally get a response from Sonny, who agrees to meet. This moment is a breakthrough, marking the beginning of Rebecca's direct interaction with the Lacks family. She heads to Baltimore to meet them, starting with Sonny. This is where things begin to take a turn, moving from distant research into personal, face-to-face connections. Rebecca's first meeting with Sonny is significant. Sonny, initially wary, opens up about the family's history and their struggles. He talks about the lack of recognition and compensation for their mother's contribution to science. This conversation sets the tone for Rebecca's subsequent interactions with the family, highlighting their feelings of betrayal and neglect. During their conversation, Sonny expresses his frustration with how their mother's legacy has been handled. He tells Rebecca about the promises made by various researchers and journalists who have approached the family over the years, only to disappear without delivering any meaningful information or support. This history of exploitation has left the Lacks family wary of outsiders, making Rebecca's task even more challenging. Rebecca's determination pays off as she slowly gains the trust of the Lacks family. Her genuine interest in Henrietta's story and her respectful approach begin to break down the barriers. Deborah, still hesitant, eventually agrees to meet Rebecca, marking another milestone in her journey. Deborah is a complex character, deeply affected by the legacy of her mother's cells. She's haunted by questions about her mother's life and death, and the impact of HeLa cells on science and medicine. Deborah's conversations with Rebecca are filled with a mix of curiosity, pain, and a desperate need for closure. She wants to know everything about her mother, from her favorite color to the details of her medical treatment and the science behind HeLa cells. This chapter also delves into the family dynamics, revealing the different ways Henrietta's children have coped with their mother's legacy. Each sibling has a unique perspective on what happened to their mother and how her cells have been used. There's a sense of shared trauma, but also individual journeys of understanding and acceptance. As Rebecca navigates these relationships, she uncovers layers of family history and personal stories that enrich her understanding of Henrietta Lacks. The Lacks family's experiences with racism, poverty, and loss are interwoven with the scientific narrative of HeLa cells, creating a powerful and emotional tapestry. One of the pivotal moments in the chapter is when Deborah shares her fears and hopes with Rebecca. She's been carrying a heavy burden, grappling with the knowledge that her mother's cells are out there, doing incredible things, while the family struggles with health issues and financial difficulties. Deborah's determination to learn about her mother and ensure her legacy is respected becomes a driving force in the story. Rebecca's commitment to telling Henrietta's story with integrity and compassion helps build a bond with the Lacks family. Her interactions with them are not just about gathering information for a book, but about honoring Henrietta's life and addressing the injustices faced by her descendants. This approach gradually earns her the family's trust and cooperation. The chapter concludes with a sense of hope and possibility. Despite the initial skepticism and barriers, Rebecca's perseverance opens the door to deeper conversations and a more profound understanding of Henrietta Lacks. The journey is far from over, but the connections Rebecca makes with the Lacks family lay the groundwork for a story that will honor both the scientific significance of HeLa cells and the personal legacy of Henrietta Lacks. As Rebecca continues her journey, she remains mindful of the ethical implications of her work. She is determined to tell the story in a way that respects the Lacks family and acknowledges the complex history of race, medical ethics, and scientific discovery. This chapter sets the stage for the deeper exploration of these themes, as Rebecca and the Lacks family navigate the intersection of personal and scientific history. So let's continue with the story in the next chapter, The Death and Life of Cell Culture. This chapter delves deeper into the incredible journey of HeLa cells and their monumental impact on science, while also highlighting the darker, more complex aspects of cell culture research. On April 10, 1951, 3 weeks after Henrietta started radiation therapy, George Guy made an appearance on WAM television in Baltimore for a special program focused on his work. With dramatic music playing in the background, the announcer stated, "Tonight we will learn why scientists believe that cancer can be conquered." The camera then panned to Guy, sitting at a desk with pictures of cells on the wall behind him. He was a long, handsome man with a pointed nose, black plastic bifocals, and a Charlie Chaplin mustache. His tweed suit was perfectly pressed, and he had a white handkerchief in his breast pocket. Guy began by giving a basic overview of cell structure in cancer. He explained that normal cells, which are tiny objects, can fit 5,000 on the head of a pin. He discussed how the transformation of normal cells into cancerous ones remained a mystery. Guy used diagrams and a long wooden pointer to illustrate his points and showed films of cells moving across the screen. He then zoomed in on one cancer cell, which started shaking violently and exploded into 5 new cancer cells. This dramatic visualization was meant to show the aggressive nature of cancer. During the show, Guy held up a clear glass pint-sized bottle, likely containing HeLa cells, and explained how his lab was using these cells to find ways to stop cancer. He mentioned that it was possible that from these fundamental studies, scientists could learn how to damage or completely wipe out cancer cells. To further this goal, Guy began sending HeLa cells to any scientist who might use them for cancer research. This practice of shipping live cells in the mail, which was uncommon at the time, was a logistical challenge. Gay found creative ways to transport the cells, such as having pilots or stewards keep tubes of cells in their shirt pockets to maintain body temperature or packing them in ice to prevent overheating. HeLa cells were sent to researchers in various locations, including Texas, India, New York, Amsterdam, and even to remote areas like the mountains of Chile in the saddlebags of pack mules. Gay would travel to different labs, demonstrating his culturing techniques and helping set up new laboratories, always carrying tubes of HeLa cells with him. He referred to these cells as his precious babies because of their potential to unlock so many scientific mysteries. The importance of HeLa cells cannot be overstated. They allowed scientists to perform experiments that would have been impossible with living humans. Researchers could cut the cells apart, expose them to various toxins, radiation, and infections, and bombard them with drugs to find treatments that could kill malignant cells without harming normal ones. These cells were also used to study immune suppression and cancer growth by injecting them into immune-compromised rats, which developed malignant tumors similar to Henrietta's. Despite their rapid spread and the flurry of new research that followed, there were no news stories about the birth of the HeLa cell line or how it might help stop cancer. Guy's television appearance didn't mention Henrietta or her cells by name, so the general public knew nothing about HeLa. By this time, the public had become disillusioned with the promises of cell culture, which had often been touted as a miracle that would save humanity from disease and even death. The chapter also revisits the earlier attempts to grow cells in culture, starting with Alexis Carrel's famous Immortal chicken heart experiment in 1912. Carrel was a French surgeon at the Rockefeller Institute who claimed to have grown a sliver of chicken heart tissue that continued to beat and grow outside the body. This achievement won him a Nobel Prize and widespread acclaim, with sensational headlines proclaiming that he had found the secret to eternal life. However, Carrel's work was later discredited, as it was discovered that he had likely been replacing the original cells with fresh ones, thus perpetuating the myth of their immortality. Carrel's eccentricities and controversial views on eugenics added to the media frenzy surrounding his work. He believed in preserving what he considered the superior white race and praised Hitler for his energetic measures in that direction. Despite his dubious scientific practices, Carrel's work influenced public perception of cell culture and immortality for decades. By 1951, the public image of immortal cells had been tarnished by Carrel's discredited experiments and associations with racist ideologies. Tissue culture was seen more as a source of fear and fascination in science fiction than a legitimate medical breakthrough. Guy's work with HeLa cells, however, marked a significant shift in the field of cell culture. The cell's ability to grow indefinitely allowed for groundbreaking research in cancer, virology, and beyond. Researchers used HeLa cells to develop methods for freezing cells without harming them, which revolutionized the way cells could be stored and shipped. This advancement made it possible to pause experiments and study cells at different points in time, providing a deeper understanding of cellular processes. The standardization of cell culture was another major contribution of HeLa cells. Before HeLa, researchers struggled with inconsistent techniques and materials, making it difficult to replicate experiments. Guy and his colleagues worked to develop standardized procedures and ingredients for culture media, which led to more reliable and reproducible results. This standardization was crucial for the advancement of scientific research, as it ensured that findings could be validated and built upon by other scientists. Despite these advancements, the widespread use of HeLa cells also brought to light significant ethical issues. The cells were taken from Henrietta Lacks without her knowledge or consent, raising questions about the rights of patients and the responsibilities of researchers. This practice was common at the time, especially in public wards where many poor and minority patients were treated. The lack of informed consent and the exploitation of vulnerable populations became central themes in the ongoing debate about medical ethics. The chapter also highlights the impact of HeLa cells on the field of virology. Researchers began exposing HeLa cells to various viruses, such as herpes, measles, mumps, and polio, to study how they infected cells and replicated. These studies led to significant discoveries in understanding viral behavior and developing vaccines. HeLa cells helped launch the field of virology and contributed to the development of methods for freezing cells, which allowed for more efficient and widespread research. In addition to their contributions to cancer and virology, HeLa cells played a role in the study of genetics and cell biology. Researchers used the cells to investigate the mechanisms of cell division, DNA replication, and genetic mutations. The cell's ability to divide indefinitely provided a unique opportunity to study these processes in detail, leading to numerous scientific breakthroughs. The chapter concludes by acknowledging the dual nature of HeLa cells' legacy. On one hand, they have been instrumental in countless scientific advancements and medical breakthroughs. On the other hand, their origin story raises important ethical questions about consent, exploitation, and the treatment of patients. Henrietta Lacks' cells continue to live on in laboratories around the world, serving as a reminder of both the potential and the pitfalls of scientific progress. In summary, this chapter delves into the transformative impact of HeLa cells on science and medicine, while also exploring the ethical complexities surrounding their use. It highlights the incredible scientific advancements made possible by these cells, from cancer research to virology to genetics, while also questioning the practices and motivations of the researchers involved. Henrietta Lacks' story is a powerful reminder of the need for ethical considerations in scientific research and the importance of respecting the individuals behind the discoveries. All right, let's continue with the story from the next chapter, A Miserable Specimen. In early June 1951, Henrietta Lacks felt a gnawing certainty that something was wrong with her body. She'd been telling her doctors that she thought her cancer was spreading, that she could feel it moving through her. But each time, they reassured her that everything was fine. Her medical records noted that she was experiencing some vague lower abdominal discomfort, but there was no evidence of recurrence. The doctors told her to return in a month. Henrietta, like many patients of her time, didn't question her doctor's judgments. This was an era when benevolent deception was common practice, where doctors withheld information they thought might frighten or confuse their patients. They believed they knew best, and most patients, especially Black patients in segregated 1950s America, did not challenge this. It was simply understood that you didn't question a white doctor's professional opinion, and many Black patients were just grateful to receive any medical treatment at all. In Henrietta's case, the standard of care was ostensibly the same as for white patients. The biopsy, radium treatment, and radiation were all typical for the time. However, studies showed that Black patients were often treated and hospitalized at later stages of illness than their white counterparts, received fewer pain medications, and had higher mortality rates. Whether Henrietta's treatment would have differed if she were white is impossible to know, but the systemic inequalities are undeniable. A few weeks after being told she was fine, Henrietta returned to the hospital, saying the discomfort she'd felt before had turned into an ache in both sides. Once again, her doctors found no evidence of recurrence and told her to come back in a month. The same cycle repeated itself. Henrietta felt worse, her pain increased, yet her medical records showed no change in diagnosis or treatment plan. During this time, Henrietta continued to live her life, balancing the heavy load of her illness with her duties as a mother and wife. Her resilience and ability to maintain a semblance of normalcy were remarkable, given the growing tumors inside her. By the end of June, Henrietta's pain was so severe that she could no longer hide it. She returned to Johns Hopkins, where the doctors finally recognized that her cancer had spread aggressively. They found that the tumors had metastasized to her diaphragm, bladder, and lungs. The radiation treatment was not working, and her condition was rapidly deteriorating. Henrietta's medical records began to reflect the grim reality of her situation. She was admitted to the hospital, where her pain became unbearable. The cancer was now blocking her intestines, causing severe swelling and making it difficult for her to eat. Despite the doctor's efforts, they could do little more than try to manage her pain and provide some comfort. The hospital staff noted that Henrietta's morale was good, and she seemed to be in good spirits, a testament to her strength and resilience. However, this facade could not hide the severity of her condition. Henrietta was becoming weaker, and the tumors were relentless, consuming her body from the inside. During her hospital stays, Henrietta's condition continued to decline. Her pain became chronic, and the treatments that once seemed hopeful now offered little relief. The doctors performed X-rays and administered pain relief, but they knew that the cancer was unstoppable. Henrietta's health was deteriorating rapidly, and the end seemed inevitable. Despite the increasing pain and the progression of her cancer, Henrietta's appearance did not reflect her suffering. She retained her outward beauty and strength, with only her eyes revealing the depth of her pain and the knowledge that she would not survive. Her friend Sadie later recalled that while Henrietta's body did not fade, her eyes told the real story, reflecting the unbearable pain and her quiet acceptance of her fate. Henrietta's final weeks were a harsh reminder of the aggressive nature of her cancer and the limitations of the medical treatments available at the time. Her struggle highlights the human cost behind the scientific advancements made possible by her cells. While her HeLa cells were thriving in George Gay's lab, contributing to groundbreaking research, Henrietta herself was losing her battle against the cancer that had taken over her body. This chapter starkly contrasts Henrietta's personal suffering with the scientific progress her cells facilitated. It underscores the ethical dilemmas surrounding medical research and patient consent, particularly in the context of race and socioeconomic status. Henrietta's story is not just about the HeLa cells that changed the world, but also about a woman who faced unimaginable pain and adversity with strength and dignity. As Henrietta's life neared its end, her story became a powerful reminder of the need for ethical considerations in medical research. Her legacy, through the HeLa cells, has had a profound impact on science, but it also raises important questions about the treatment of patients and the respect for their rights and dignity. Henrietta Lacks's journey, as chronicled in this chapter, is a poignant testament to her resilience and strength. It also serves as a call to action for the medical community to ensure that the advancements in science are accompanied by respect for the individuals behind the discoveries. Her story is a powerful reminder of the human cost of scientific progress and the importance of ethical practices in research. As we continue to follow Henrietta's story, it becomes clear that her legacy is not just scientific but deeply human. Her cells have contributed to countless medical breakthroughs, but her personal story highlights the need for compassion and respect in the pursuit of knowledge. Henrietta Lacks's life and death remind us that behind every scientific discovery is a person whose story deserves to be told and remembered. Alright, so the next chapter, Turner Station, gives us a fascinating look at the place that played a pivotal role in Henrietta Lacks' life and her family's history. This chapter is like taking a trip back in time and seeing the evolution of a small community through the eyes of someone searching for answers. Turner Station was a place of promise during Henrietta's time. When she and her husband Day moved there, it was part of a booming community driven by the steel industry at Sparrows Point. The chapter starts by setting the scene. Turner Station was once a thriving town, bustling with activity and full of families looking for a better life. This was during the Great Migration, where many African Americans moved from the rural South to industrial cities in the North, seeking better opportunities. Sparrows Point was the largest steel mill in the world back then. It provided jobs, albeit tough and dangerous ones, to many black men who couldn't find work elsewhere. Day worked there, like many others from Clover and surrounding areas, drawn by the promise of steady employment. The town itself was a patchwork of housing projects, many built hastily to accommodate the influx of workers. These homes were often small and crowded, but they represented hope and stability for families like the Lackses. However, by the time Rebecca Skloot visited Turner Station, the place had changed dramatically. The decline of the steel industry hit the community hard. What was once a vibrant town had become a shadow of its former self, marked by boarded-up houses, closed businesses, and rising crime. The once thriving community center where children played and families gathered was now surrounded by a security wall, and drug dealers and gangs had become a common sight. Rebecca's journey to Turner Station is a bit of an adventure. She describes navigating through a maze of dilapidated buildings and empty streets, looking for signs of life and remnants of the past. She's armed with addresses and phone numbers, trying to track down people who might have known Henrietta. Her determination is palpable, and you can feel her frustration and curiosity as she drives around, piecing together the history of this place and its people. One of the key figures Rebecca seeks out is Courtney Speed, a local woman who owns a grocery store and is passionate about preserving the memory of Henrietta Lacks. Courtney had started a foundation to build a museum in Henrietta's honor, driven by a deep sense of pride and a desire to educate people about Henrietta's contributions to science. When Rebecca finally meets Courtney, it's clear that she's found an ally in her quest to uncover the full story of Henrietta Lacks. Courtney's grocery store, Speed's Grocery, becomes a central point in this chapter. It's more than just a place to buy food, it's a hub of community activity and a repository of local history. Courtney's efforts to honor Henrietta are inspiring, but they're also met with challenges. The struggle to secure funding and support for the museum reflects broader issues of recognition and justice for Henrietta and her family. As Rebecca explores Turner Station, she paints a vivid picture of its past and present. She describes the changes over the decades, from the booming wartime economy to the post-industrial decline. The community's spirit, however, remains resilient. Despite the hardships, there's a sense of pride and determination among the residents to remember and celebrate their history. The chapter also delves into the personal stories of Henrietta's children and grandchildren, who are still grappling with the legacy of HeLa cells. Their lives have been marked by poverty, health issues, and a lack of recognition for their mother's contributions to science. This juxtaposition of Henrietta's immortal cells, which have contributed to countless medical breakthroughs, with the struggles of her descendants, is both poignant and powerful. Rebecca's interactions with the Lacks family are a mix of tension and hope. They're understandably wary of yet another outsider wanting to tell their story, but they also see in Rebecca someone who genuinely cares about honoring Henrietta's memory. The family's guarded trust begins to open up as they share their experiences and memories, providing Rebecca with valuable insights into Henrietta's life and the impact of her cells on the world. Turner Station itself is almost a character in this chapter, embodying the hopes, struggles, and resilience of its residents. It's a place where the past and present collide, where the legacy of industrial America's heyday is visible in the crumbling infrastructure and the stories of the people who remain. Rebecca's visit to Turner Station is a crucial part of her journey to understand Henrietta Lacks fully. It's a reminder that behind every scientific discovery, there are real people with real stories. The chapter underscores the importance of recognizing and honoring those stories, not just for their scientific contributions but for their human experiences. In conclusion, Turner Station is a rich, layered chapter that connects the personal and communal history of Henrietta Lacks with the broader narrative of American industry and migration. It's a testament to the enduring impact of Henrietta's life and a call to remember and respect the individuals behind the scientific advancements that shape our world. The chapter leaves you with a deeper appreciation of Henrietta Lacks as not just a source of immortal cells but as a mother, a wife, and a central figure in a community that continues to strive for recognition and justice. All right, let's continue with the story from the next chapter, The Other Side of the Tracks. So, this chapter really sets the scene in Clover, Virginia, a place deeply tied to Henrietta Lacks' roots. Clover is a small town in southern Virginia, and it's described in such a vivid way that you can almost feel the warm December air and see the abandoned buildings lining its streets. Rebecca Skloot, the author, is on a mission to uncover more about Henrietta's life, so she heads to Clover armed with just a yellow post-it note from Sonny Lacks, Henrietta's son, telling her to find Lacks Town. Downtown Clover looks like a place frozen in time, with its empty lots, boarded-up gas stations, and long-abandoned businesses. It's like stepping into a ghost town where life once thrived but has now slowly faded away. The businesses that once bustled with activity now stand silent and dusty. Abbott's clothing store still has boxes of new Red Wing work boots stacked to the ceiling, but they're covered in thick dust. Gregory and Martin's supermarket's clock has stopped at 6:34, as if time itself paused when the last customer left decades ago. Rebecca's journey takes her to meet the greeter, a local fixture known for waving at passing cars. He directs her towards Lacks Town, pointing across the tracks. This simple gesture leads her into a different world. On one side of the road, there are well-maintained properties with white picket fences and manicured lawns. On the other, there's a small, dilapidated shack, barely holding together, with weeds growing through the gaps in its walls. This stark contrast symbolizes the divide not just between wealth and poverty, but also between the histories of the black and white residents of Clover. Lacks Town itself is a single road lined with a mix of old slave cabins, cinder block homes, and trailers, some barely standing, others showing signs of life with satellite dishes and porch swings. It's a community where the past and present collide, where the legacy of slavery and segregation is still palpable. Rebecca drives up and down Lackstown Road multiple times, her car's broken muffler drawing attention from the residents. Eventually, a man named Cootie, Henrietta's cousin, comes out to greet her. Cootie, whose real name is Hector Henry, is a character straight out of a rich Southern narrative. He's had polio since he was 9, and his light skin allowed a white doctor to sneak him into a hospital for treatment, as black patients were not admitted. Cootie's story, like many in Lackstown, is one of survival against the odds. Cootie invites Rebecca into his home, which is filled with the smell of wood smoke and the sounds of a radio preacher. He talks about Henrietta with a mix of reverence and mystery, reflecting on how her cells could still be alive while she is not. He shares local folklore about spirits and voodoo, which adds another layer of intrigue to Henrietta's story. Cootie believes there's something almost supernatural about the way Henrietta's cells have lived on, helping cure polio and other diseases. His house, with its dried garlic and onions hanging in the corners to ward off spirits, feels like a place where the past is ever present. As they talk, Cootie takes Rebecca to the old home house where Henrietta grew up. The home house is in ruins now, trampled by cows and time, but it was once a real home, cared for and lived in. The remnants of Henrietta's life, a tattered boot, a Truade soda bottle lie scattered on the floor, silent witnesses to a life that once was. Rebecca's exploration of Clover and Lackstown paints a picture of a community rich in history and resilience but marked by the scars of segregation and poverty. It's a place where the legacy of slavery is still felt, where the descendants of slaves and slave owners live side by side, often in tension but also in shared history. Meeting Cootie and seeing Lackstown firsthand gives Rebecca a deeper understanding of Henrietta's background and the community that shaped her. It's a poignant reminder that behind the scientific marvel of HeLa cells is a woman whose life was intertwined with the struggles and triumphs of her family and community. This chapter not only adds depth to Henrietta's story but also raises questions about the legacy of racism and inequality in America. It's a powerful exploration of place and memory, showing how the past continues to shape the present in ways both visible and hidden. Through her journey, Rebecca brings to light the human stories behind the scientific achievements, reminding us that every discovery is rooted in the lived experiences of real people. In conclusion, The Other Side of the Tracks is a rich, evocative chapter that delves into the heart of Clover, Virginia, and the complex history of the Lacks family. It's a testament to the enduring impact of Henrietta's life and the importance of remembering the people and places that make scientific advancements possible. All right, let's dive into the next chapter titled The Devil of Pain Itself, where the story of Henrietta Lacks takes a deeply emotional turn as her condition worsens. By September of 1951, Henrietta's body was almost entirely taken over by tumors. The cancer had spread to her diaphragm, bladder, lungs, and practically everywhere else. Her abdomen was so swollen that it looked like she was 6 months pregnant. Her kidneys had stopped functioning properly, leading to the accumulation of toxins in her body, which made her extremely nauseous. The doctors at Johns Hopkins administered blood transfusion after blood transfusion, but her body was failing. One doctor noted in her medical record to stop giving her blood transfusions until her deficit with the blood bank was made up. When Henrietta's cousin Emmett Lacks heard that she needed blood, he dropped everything and ran to find his brother and some friends. Emmett and his friends had a deep bond with Henrietta. When they first moved to Baltimore from the country, she had taken care of them, providing meals and a place to stay. She had been a guiding figure, ensuring they found their way in the new city, and even helping them find work. Emmett had stayed at Henrietta's home for so long that he had his own bed in the hallway. The last time Emmett saw Henrietta was when he took her to visit her daughter Elsie at Crownsville. They found Elsie behind barbed wire, and Henrietta seemed desperate and relieved to see her daughter looking well. It was a poignant moment, and Emmett realized later that Henrietta probably knew it would be the last time she would see Elsie. When Emmett learned that Henrietta needed blood, he gathered a group of men, and they all rushed to Johns Hopkins. They found Henrietta in a pitiful state, drastically thinner than before, strapped to the bed to prevent her from falling out due to the violent convulsions caused by her pain. The sight of Henrietta in such agony, with her sister Gladys and friend Sadie by her side, was heartbreaking. They had come to get her well, but it was clear that Henrietta was in unbearable pain. The doctors had to increase her radiation dose daily in a desperate attempt to shrink the tumors and ease her pain. Each day the radiation burned her skin blacker, and the pain became more excruciating. Despite their efforts, the tumors continued to grow. By early August, Henrietta's suffering had become so intense that she decided to stay in the hospital, knowing that she needed better care than what could be provided at home. Once admitted, the medical staff did everything they could to manage her pain. They tried morphine, Demerol, and even Dromorin, but nothing provided lasting relief. In a final attempt to ease her suffering, a doctor injected pure alcohol directly into her spine, but even this drastic measure failed. Henrietta's children visited her initially, but seeing their mother in such pain was too much for them and for her. The hospital staff decided it was better if they stopped visiting. Instead, they would park their car under Henrietta's hospital window so that she could see her children playing outside. Soon, however, Henrietta could no longer even get out of bed to look out the window. As Henrietta's condition deteriorated, her body became increasingly poisoned by the toxins her kidneys could no longer filter. Her medical records from this time are filled with notes about her unbearable pain and the futile attempts to alleviate it. The doctors were helpless against the aggressive cancer that was ravaging her body. They discontinued all treatments except for pain relief. Henrietta's decline was brutal. The once vibrant woman was reduced to a shadow of her former self. Her body was consumed by the cancer, but her spirit remained remarkably resilient. The agony she endured is almost unimaginable, but she continued to fight, hoping for some relief. In the last days of her life, Henrietta's friends and family surrounded her with love and support, but they were powerless against the relentless cancer. Her death was not just a personal loss, but a reminder of the human suffering behind the scientific progress that her cells would enable. Henrietta's pain and the story of her family highlight the deep ethical questions surrounding medical research and the treatment of patients, particularly those from marginalized communities. This chapter is a stark reminder of the contrast between the scientific breakthroughs made possible by HeLa cells and the personal tragedy of Henrietta Lacks. Her cells, which had become so valuable to medical research, were taken without her knowledge or consent, and while they thrived and contributed to countless medical advancements, Henrietta herself suffered and died in pain. Henrietta's story is one of incredible strength and resilience. It's a story that demands recognition of the person behind the cells and the immense suffering she endured. Her legacy is not just in the scientific achievements her cells facilitated, but in the ongoing conversation about ethics, consent, and the rights of patients. As we continue to follow Henrietta's journey, it's important to remember the human cost behind the scientific progress. Her story is a powerful reminder of the need for ethical standards in medical research and the importance of respecting the individuals who contribute to science, often without their knowledge or consent. Henrietta Lacks' life and death continue to resonate, highlighting the profound impact one person can have on the world, even in the face of tremendous suffering. Alright, so the next chapter, The HeLa Factory, gives us a fascinating insight into how Henrietta's cells were mass-produced and how they contributed to some of the biggest scientific breakthroughs of the time. By the end of 1951, the world was in the grip of the worst polio epidemic in history. Schools were closed, parents were panicking, and everyone was desperate for a vaccine. Jonas Salk, a scientist at the University of Pittsburgh, announced that he had developed the first polio vaccine, but he needed to test it on a large scale to ensure it was safe and effective. This required growing cells in massive quantities, something that had never been done before. That's where HeLa cells came in. The National Foundation for Infantile Paralysis (NFIP), which was behind the March of Dimes campaign, needed a reliable and affordable way to grow cells for testing the polio vaccine. They turned to George Gay, who had been working with Henrietta's cells. Gay realized that HeLa cells could be the answer to this problem. Unlike other cells, HeLa cells could be grown in large quantities without losing their ability to be infected with viruses, which made them perfect for this kind of research. The NFIP provided funding to establish a HeLa cell production facility at the Tuskegee Institute, one of the most prestigious historically Black universities in the country. This decision was influenced by Charles Bynum, the director of Negro activities for the foundation. Bynum saw this as an opportunity to provide funding and training for Black scientists and technicians. Within months, a team of 6 black scientists and technicians built a cell production factory at Tuskegee. This factory was unlike anything seen before. It had industrial steel autoclaves for sterilizing equipment, enormous vats of culture medium, and rows of incubators and glass culturing bottles. The team mixed thousands of liters of culture medium each week, using ingredients like salts, minerals, and serum collected from students, soldiers, and local farmers who were paid for their blood. The production process was intense and highly organized. Technicians worked in shifts to ensure that the cells were alive and healthy. They inspected the cultures under microscopes, prepared them for shipping, and sent them to researchers across the country. The demand for HeLa cells was so high that the team soon grew to 35 scientists and technicians, producing about 20,000 tubes of HeLa cells each week. These cells were crucial in proving the effectiveness of the Salk vaccine. The New York Times highlighted the significant contribution of the Tuskegee Institute, showing pictures of black women working with microscopes and HeLa cells. The headline read, "Unit at Tuskegee helps polio fight. Corps of Negro scientists has key role in evaluating Dr. Salk's vaccine." HeLa cells are grown. It was a moment of pride for the black community, showcasing their role in one of the most important medical breakthroughs of the century. But the use of HeLa cells didn't stop with polio. They were used to study cancer, genetics, virology, and many other fields. Researchers exposed HeLa cells to various viruses to understand how they infected cells and spread. They used the cells to develop methods for freezing cells without harming them, which revolutionized cell transportation and storage. Freezing allowed scientists to pause experiments and compare results over time, advancing their understanding of cellular processes. HeLa cells also played a crucial role in the standardization of cell culture techniques. Before HeLa, cell culture was a chaotic field with inconsistent methods and materials. Researchers used different ingredients and techniques, making it difficult to replicate experiments. The mass production of HeLa cells allowed for the development of standardized procedures and materials, making cell culture more reliable and reproducible. One of the most significant advancements was the development of the first standardized culture medium by Harry Eagle at the National Institutes of Health. Using HeLa cells, Eagle created a medium that could be produced by the gallon and shipped ready to use. This breakthrough simplified cell culture and made it more accessible to researchers worldwide. As HeLa cells became more widely available, they were used for a variety of purposes beyond medical research. Cosmetic and pharmaceutical companies used them to test the effects of new products on human cells, reducing the need for animal testing. HeLa cells were also used to study the effects of radiation, deep sea pressure, and space conditions on human cells, contributing to our understanding of how extreme environments impact human biology. Despite their widespread use and the enormous impact they had on science, the story of HeLa cells also raises significant ethical questions. Henrietta Lacks' cells were taken without her knowledge or consent, a common practice at the time, especially for black patients in segregated hospitals. The exploitation of her cells and the lack of recognition or compensation for her family highlight the racial and ethical issues in medical research. As the HeLa cell industry grew, George Gay faced criticism for his role in distributing the cells. Some colleagues felt that he had released HeLa cells too widely, making it difficult to control their use. Gay struggled with the widespread fixation on HeLa and the commercialization of cell culture. He continued to focus on growing both normal and cancerous cells from the same patients to compare them, hoping to advance cancer research. The chapter also touches on the commercialization of HeLa cells. Companies like Microbiological Associates, which later became part of major biotech firms like Invitrogen and Biohitaker, started by selling HeLa cells. This industry grew into a multi-billion-dollar market for human biological materials. While Gay and Johns Hopkins didn't profit directly from HeLa cells, many for-profit cell banks and biotech companies did, raising further ethical concerns about the exploitation of Henrietta's legacy. In summary, the HeLa Factory chapter is a deep dive into the massive impact Henrietta Lacks' cells had on scientific research and the medical field. It highlights the contributions of black scientists at Tuskegee, the breakthroughs in cell culture and virology, and the ethical dilemmas surrounding the use of HeLa cells. This chapter underscores the complex interplay between scientific progress and the human stories behind the discoveries, reminding us of the need for ethical considerations and recognition of individual contributions in the pursuit of knowledge. Alright, let's continue with the story in the next chapter, Helen Lane, which delves into the secrecy and confusion surrounding the true identity of the woman behind the HeLa cells. The chapter starts with the revelation that many people actually knew Henrietta Lacks's real name, despite efforts to keep it a secret. George Gay, the scientist who first cultured HeLa cells, had told several colleagues, and various medical staff at Johns Hopkins knew her identity as well. However, to protect her privacy, her real name was rarely used in public documents or discussions. In November 1953, the Minneapolis Star became the first publication to identify Henrietta, but they got her name wrong. Calling her Henrietta Lacks, this misidentification created a domino effect. Soon after, a press officer at the National Foundation for Infantile Paralysis (NFIP) contacted Guy, wanting to write a detailed article about HeLa cells. He was interested in the human interest angle of the story, which he believed would engage the public. Despite Gay's insistence on maintaining patient confidentiality, the press officer argued that revealing Henrietta's name would not only protect the rights of individuals but also add a compelling human element to the story. Guy, understanding the potential for public interest but wary of breaching confidentiality, suggested using a fictitious name for the patient. Eventually, this led to the adoption of the pseudonym Helen Lane, a name that appeared in numerous articles and scientific reports for decades. In 1954, Collier's magazine published a story about the promise of tissue culture, referring to the woman behind the HeLa cells as Helen L. The article described her as a young woman in her 30s who had been admitted to Johns Hopkins with an incurable cancer of the cervix, and it claimed her cells were grown from a sample taken after her death, which was not true. This misinformation was likely perpetuated within the walls of Hopkins itself. Even after reviewing the article before its publication, Guy and his team did not correct these inaccuracies, further cementing the pseudonym and misinformation in the public narrative. The chapter also explores the confusion and rumors that arose from the use of the pseudonym. Various names like Helen Lane, Helen Larson, and even Helen Lawrence started to circulate in scientific and media reports. The confusion was so widespread that some people even speculated that Helen Lane was a fictitious character, possibly Guy's secretary, mistress, or a prostitute from the streets near Hopkins. Despite the widespread use of the pseudonym, the scientific community eventually felt the need to set the record straight. In 1973, a biologist named J. Douglas wrote a letter to the journal Nature, questioning the true identity of the woman behind HeLa cells. He noted that the cells were named after an American Negro woman and emphasized the scientific value and immortality of these cells. However, he pointed out the conflicting names used in textbooks and articles, Helen Lane in one and Henrietta Lacks in another, and called for clarification. Douglas's letter received a flood of responses, though many focused on correcting his terminology rather than addressing the name issue. Eventually, Howard Jones, a gynecologist who had worked with Henrietta, clarified in a letter to Douglas that HeLa cells were indeed named after Henrietta Lacks. Jones's clarification began to correct the record within the scientific community. The chapter highlights the consequences of using a pseudonym. By obscuring Henrietta's true identity, her family remained unaware of the significant impact her cells had on science and medicine. They did not know that her cells were alive and being used for research, bought and sold worldwide. This secrecy also meant that the Lacks family was excluded from any discussions about the use of Henrietta's cells, further complicating their understanding and feelings about the scientific legacy of their mother. One particularly poignant moment in the chapter involves a conversation between Babette Lacks, Henrietta's daughter-in-law, and a relative working at the National Cancer Institute. During a casual conversation, Babette mentioned her connection to the Lacks family. The relative, astonished, revealed that he had been working with cells from a woman named Henrietta Lacks. This revelation shocked Babette and led to the family's first awareness of the HeLa cell's significance. The chapter ends by discussing the ongoing ethical implications of using Henrietta's cells without her or her family's consent. The lack of informed consent and the subsequent use of her cells for profit raised significant questions about the rights of patients and their families in medical research. The story of Henrietta Lacks and HeLa cells became a focal point in discussions about medical ethics, patient privacy, and the need for transparent and respectful practices in scientific research. In summary, Helen Lane sheds light on the deliberate and accidental obfuscation of Henrietta Lacks's identity, the resulting confusion, and the ethical dilemmas that arose from using her cells without consent. The chapter underscores the importance of recognizing and respecting the individuals behind scientific advancements, highlighting the human stories that are often hidden behind the veil of scientific progress. Henrietta Lacks's legacy is a powerful reminder of the need for ethical standards and the acknowledgement of personal contributions in the pursuit of medical knowledge. All right, let's continue with the story from the next chapter, Too Young to Remember. After Henrietta's funeral, the Lacks family faced a challenging time. Cousins from Clover and all over Turner Station came to support the family, bringing food and helping take care of the children. The house was constantly filled with relatives, children, and a sense of communal effort to help Day and the kids through their grief. However, amidst all this, tuberculosis was brought into the house by an unknown relative. Within weeks of Henrietta's death, her children Sonny, Deborah, and baby Joe were diagnosed with TB. They were just between 1 and 4 years old. The doctor sent Deborah home with massive TB pills, but Joe, who was barely a year old, suffered severely. He spent a significant part of his second year in the hospital, isolated and coughing up blood. His condition was so dire that it nearly killed him. After his hospital stay, he was passed from cousin to cousin, as the family struggled to manage the illness and their daily lives. Day was working 2 jobs to make ends meet, which left the eldest son, Lawrence, to drop out of school to take care of his siblings. Lawrence tried to balance responsibility with his desire to live a normal teenage life. At 16, he wanted to visit pool halls but was too young to get in, so he lied about his age to get a voter's registration card. This backfired when he was drafted into the military, because Congress had just lowered the minimum draft age due to the Korean War. At 16, Lawrence was sent to serve 2 years at Fort Belvoir in Virginia. With Lawrence gone, the already struggling family had to find another way to take care of the children. No one told Sonny, Deborah, or Joe what had happened to their mother, and they were afraid to ask. In their household, the rule was to do as adults said, or face punishment. The children were to sit quietly, hands folded, and only speak when spoken to. To them, their mother was there one day and gone the next, replaced by Ethel, a woman whom Sadie and Margaret had called that hateful woman. Ethel, known for her jealousy of Henrietta, moved into the house with her husband, Galen, ostensibly to help with the children. Rumors spread that Ethel had ulterior motives, possibly seeking revenge on Henrietta by mistreating her children. Indeed, life under Ethel was harsh. The children grew up hungry, surviving on cold biscuits that had to last until dinner. Ethel placed locks on the refrigerator and cupboards to keep them from snacking between meals and forbade them from having ice in their water, because it made noise. On rare occasions, if they were deemed good, she might give them a slice of bologna or pour bacon grease on their biscuits. Ethel's cruelty extended beyond starvation. She was physically abusive, particularly to Joe, who she seemed to target the most. She beat him for any reason, often tying him up and locking him in the basement. This abuse deeply scarred Joe, leading to severe anger issues that plagued him throughout his life. Meanwhile, the family's financial situation remained dire. Day's 2 jobs were not enough, and the children often had to fend for themselves. The trauma and instability of their home life had long-lasting effects. Lawrence, who had managed to escape to the military, struggled with guilt and a sense of responsibility for his siblings. When he returned, he did his best to support them, but the damage had already been done. Deborah, too young to understand her mother's death, or the subsequent hardships fully, developed a strong desire to learn about her mother. She grew up hearing conflicting stories and harboring questions about who Henrietta was and what had happened to her. This quest for understanding became a central part of her identity. The chapter paints a vivid picture of the children's suffering and the systemic issues that allowed such mistreatment to go unchecked. It also highlights the community's role in both supporting and failing the Lacks family. While relatives came to help initially, the ongoing care and stability the children needed were sorely lacking. In later years, these early traumas manifested in various ways. Lawrence tried to create a stable life for himself, opening a convenience store and avoiding trouble. Sonny joined the Air Force and managed to stay out of significant trouble, becoming a ladies' man in his own right. However, Joe's path was more troubled. He struggled with authority and anger, dropping out of school and frequently getting into fights. His inability to control his rage led to multiple run-ins with the law. Joe's life spiraled further when he was drafted into the military. The discipline and structure of military life did little to quell his anger. Instead, he spent much of his time in solitary confinement for insubordination and fighting. The isolation and lack of support only deepened his anger and resentment. Upon his discharge, Joe returned home, angrier and more volatile than ever. This culminated in a violent confrontation with a neighborhood kid named Ivy, which ended with Joe stabbing Ivy to death. The murder trial and Joe's subsequent imprisonment marked a significant turning point for the Lacks family, adding another layer of tragedy to their already difficult lives. In prison, Joe found Islam and changed his name to Zacharia Bari Abdul Rahman. This new identity and faith provided him with some structure and purpose, but the scars of his childhood remained. His story is a stark reminder of the long-lasting impact of childhood trauma and the importance of a supportive and nurturing environment for children. The chapter also delves into the broader implications of the Lacks family's struggles. It raises questions about the systemic failures that allowed such abuse to occur and the lack of resources for families in need. It highlights the importance of community support and the devastating effects of its absence. In conclusion, Too Young to Remember is a poignant exploration of the Lacks children's lives after Henrietta's death. It sheds light on the harsh realities they faced, the impact of systemic failures, and the long-lasting effects of trauma. The chapter underscores the importance of remembering the human stories behind scientific advancements and the need for ethical and compassionate practices in all areas of life. All right, let's continue with the story from the next chapter. Spending eternity in the same place. This chapter offers a deeper look into the Lacks family history and Henrietta's final resting place. During Rebecca Skloot's first visit with Henrietta's cousin Cootie, he shared that no one ever really talked about Henrietta. They didn't mention her illness or her death, and now it was almost like she had never existed, except for her children and the infamous cells. Cootie mentioned that Henrietta's cells had lived longer than her memory, a poignant statement that underscores the disconnection between the scientific legacy and the personal one. Cootie directed Rebecca to talk to Henrietta's cousin Cliff, who had grown up with her like a brother. When Rebecca visited Cliff, she was welcomed warmly. Cliff, in his 70s, still managed the tobacco barn his father had built, keeping the furnaces at the right temperature. His house was modest, with electric blue and white walls darkened with oil and dirt. The upstairs was blocked off to keep the warmth downstairs, and the house had a rustic charm, with makeshift repairs and old furniture. Cliff spent most of his time on his porch, greeting passing cars. He had a weathered appearance from years of hard work, with hands coarse as burlap and yellowed fingernails. When Rebecca told him about writing a book on Henrietta, he eagerly offered to show her where Henrietta was buried. They walked through the overgrown family cemetery, a small clearing surrounded by barbed wire, where cows had trampled the area, leaving manure and hoofprints on graves. Many tombstones were homemade from concrete, while others were store-bought marble. Some graves were marked with simple metal plates, but many were unmarked. Cliff pointed out the graves of various family members, noting how they used to mark graves with rocks until a bulldozer cleared the cemetery, making it difficult to locate specific graves. Henrietta's grave was among the unmarked ones, but Cliff knew she was buried near her mother's grave, a lone tombstone at the cemetery's edge. The tombstone read, Eliza, wife of J.R. Pleasant. June 12, 1888 Oct. 28, 1924. On but not forgotten. Henrietta had lost her mother when she was just 4 years old, a parallel to how her own children lost her. Cliff explained that Henrietta used to take good care of her mother's grave and was buried nearby, although the exact spot was unknown. Rebecca's visit to the cemetery was an emotional experience, highlighting the stark contrast between Henrietta's significant scientific legacy and her humble, almost forgotten resting place. It underscored the gap between the fame of the HeLa cells and the obscurity of Henrietta's personal history. Cliff's reflections on Henrietta's cells being used for research and developing cures for diseases struck a chord. He saw it as a miracle, even if he didn't fully understand the scientific details. His pride in Henrietta's contribution to science was evident, yet he also felt the sadness of her unmarked grave and the anonymity of her final resting place. The chapter also delves into the broader implications of Henrietta's story, reflecting on how her cells have lived on, impacting countless lives and advancing scientific knowledge. This continuation of her life through her cells stands in stark contrast to her forgotten grave, a poignant reminder of the ethical and personal dimensions of scientific progress. In conclusion, Spending Eternity in the Same Place is a deeply moving chapter that bridges the gap between Henrietta Lacks' scientific legacy and her personal history. It emphasizes the need to remember and honor the individuals behind scientific advancements, recognizing their contributions and acknowledging their personal stories. This chapter highlights the profound impact Henrietta's cells have had on the world, while also reminding us of the importance of remembering the person behind the cells. Alright, so let's dive into the next chapter titled Illegal, Immoral, and Deplorable from the Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks by Rebecca Skloot. This chapter delves into the complex and often troubling history of medical ethics, focusing on the use of HeLa cells and other similar cases that highlight the ethical dilemmas in medical research. This chapter starts by discussing Chester Southam, a prominent virologist and cancer researcher in the 1950s and 60s. Southam was interested in understanding whether cancer was caused by a virus, and whether it could be transmitted from person to person. To explore these questions, he conducted experiments that, by today's standards, were highly unethical. He injected HeLa cells into cancer patients, prisoners, and healthy individuals without their informed consent to see if they would develop cancer. This was done under the guise of testing their immune responses. Southam's experiments were based on the belief that HeLa cells, which were highly aggressive and invasive, could provide insights into cancer's mechanisms and potential treatments. However, his methods were controversial. Southam and his colleagues justified their actions by arguing that the injections were harmless and that informed consent was unnecessary because the patients were not being harmed and the research was for the greater good. This mindset was not uncommon at the time, as many researchers believed that the potential benefits of their work outweighed the ethical considerations of using human subjects without their knowledge or consent. The chapter then moves to the legal and ethical fallout from Southam's experiments. In 1963, 3 Jewish doctors at the Jewish Chronic Disease Hospital in Brooklyn, where Southam conducted some of his research, resigned in protest. They were appalled by the lack of informed consent and the ethical implications of injecting patients with cancer cells without their knowledge. Their resignation sparked a public outcry and a subsequent investigation by the New York State Attorney General. The investigation led to a significant turning point in medical ethics. The Attorney General's report condemned Southam's actions as illegal, immoral, and deplorable, and the case went to trial. Southam defended himself by arguing that his research was crucial for understanding cancer and that he had followed common practices of the time. Despite his defense, the court ruled against him, and Southam's medical license was suspended for a year. This case highlighted the need for clearer ethical guidelines and greater oversight in medical research. The public reaction to Southam's case was mixed. While many were horrified by the revelations, others saw it as a necessary evil for scientific progress. This dichotomy reflected broader societal attitudes towards medical research and the balance between potential benefits and ethical considerations. The case also underscored the vulnerability of certain populations, such as prisoners and the mentally ill, who were often used in research without their consent. Following the Southam case, the chapter delves into the broader implications for medical research and the development of ethical standards. It discusses the establishment of institutional review boards (IRBs) and the introduction of federal regulations to protect human subjects in research. These changes were aimed at ensuring that researchers obtained informed consent and conducted their work with greater transparency and accountability. The chapter also touches on other notorious cases of unethical medical research, such as the Tuskegee syphilis study, where African American men with syphilis were left untreated to study the disease's progression. These cases highlighted systemic issues in medical research, including racism, exploitation, and the lack of oversight, which often led to significant harm to vulnerable populations. Rebecca Skloot uses these historical examples to underscore the ethical complexities surrounding HeLa cells and the broader context of medical research. The chapter raises important questions about the balance between scientific progress and ethical responsibility, and the need for ongoing vigilance to protect the rights and dignity of research subjects. In summary, Illegal, Immoral, and Deplorable is a compelling chapter that delves into the dark side of medical research, highlighting the ethical challenges and the need for stringent guidelines to protect human subjects. It provides a historical context for the use of HeLa cells and other similar cases, emphasizing the importance of informed consent and the ethical responsibilities of researchers. This chapter serves as a powerful reminder of the human cost of scientific progress and the need for continued ethical scrutiny in medical research. Let's continue the story from the chapter titled Strangest Hybrid. This chapter delves into a fascinating and ethically complex period in scientific history, where researchers began fusing HeLa cells with other cells to create hybrid cells. This process was spearheaded by Leonard Hayflick and Stanley Gardler, who discovered something unexpected and troubling about HeLa cells. In the 1960s, Leonard Hayflick was a scientist who discovered that normal human cells have a limited number of times they can divide before they stop, a phenomenon now known as the Hayflick limit. This was a groundbreaking discovery because it suggested that normal cells have an internal clock that eventually leads to their death, contrasting with cancer cells like HeLa, which can divide indefinitely. Around the same time, Stanley Gardler, another prominent scientist, was working with HeLa cells and made a startling discovery. He found that HeLa cells had contaminated many other cell cultures in labs around the world. This was a significant problem because it meant that a lot of research that scientists believed they were conducting on other cell types was actually being conducted on HeLa cells. Gardler's findings were initially met with skepticism and resistance because they undermined a vast amount of scientific research. Gardler used a genetic marker known as glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase G6PDA to prove his point. G6PDA is an enzyme variant present in African American populations, but very rare in other ethnic groups. Gardler demonstrated that all the supposedly different cell lines he tested were actually HeLa cells, based on the presence of this enzyme variant. This revelation was both groundbreaking and controversial, as it suggested that HeLa cells had overtaken other cell cultures due to their aggressive growth. The contamination of cell cultures by HeLa cells posed significant ethical and scientific challenges. It raised questions about the validity of numerous studies and the reliability of cell culture research. The aggressive nature of HeLa cells meant they could easily overgrow other cell cultures, leading to widespread contamination. The chapter also highlights the ethical implications of creating hybrid cells. Researchers began fusing HeLa cells with mouse cells to create human-mouse hybrid cells. This allowed scientists to study the behavior of human genes in a controlled environment, leading to significant advancements in genetics and cell biology. However, the creation of these hybrid cells also raised ethical concerns about the boundaries of scientific research and the implications of crossing species barriers. Despite the controversies, the hybrid cells provided valuable insights into human genetics. Researchers could observe how human genes functioned within the context of a different species, shedding light on genetic disorders and the behavior of cancer cells. This period marked a significant advancement in our understanding of genetics and cell biology, although it came with its own set of ethical dilemmas. The chapter illustrates how HeLa cells continued to influence scientific research in unexpected ways. The discovery of cell culture contamination by HeLa cells forced the scientific community to reevaluate their methods and ensure the integrity of their research. It also underscored the importance of rigorous controls in scientific experiments to prevent contamination and maintain the validity of research findings. As we continue the story, we see the dual nature of scientific progress, the excitement of discovery, and the ethical challenges that come with it. The HeLa cells, while providing invaluable insights and advancements, also brought to light the need for ethical considerations and the importance of transparency in scientific research. In conclusion, Strangest Hybrid is a chapter that explores the intersection of scientific innovation and ethical responsibility. It highlights the significant impact of HeLa cells on genetics and cell biology, while also raising important questions about the conduct of scientific research. This chapter is a reminder of the complexities and responsibilities that come with scientific discovery and the need to balance progress with ethical considerations. All right, let's dive into the next chapter. The most critical time on this earth is now, and summarize it as if I'm telling you the story. In this chapter, the story takes a deep dive into the life of Deborah Lacks, Henrietta's daughter, and her journey to understand her mother's legacy. It's a period of discovery and turmoil for Deborah, marked by her determination to uncover the truth about her mother and the HeLa cells. Deborah has always been haunted by questions about her mother. She was too young to remember much about Henrietta, and the secrecy surrounding her mother's cells only fueled her curiosity and confusion. As she grew older, these questions became more pressing, and she was determined to get answers. The chapter begins with Deborah receiving a letter from Christoph Lengauer, a cancer researcher at Johns Hopkins. Lengauer had written to tell her about a planned event to honor Henrietta and to invite her to visit his lab. This invitation marked a significant moment for Deborah, as it represented an opportunity to learn more about her mother and her scientific legacy. Deborah's journey to Johns Hopkins is filled with anxiety and anticipation. She has mixed feelings about the visit. On one hand, she's excited to learn more about her mother, but on the other, she's fearful of what she might discover. The weight of her family's history and the legacy of HeLa cells weigh heavily on her mind. When Deborah arrives at Johns Hopkins, she is greeted warmly by Lengauer and his team. They take her on a tour of the lab, showing her the cells and explaining the significance of HeLa. For Deborah, seeing her mother's cells is an emotional experience. She feels a deep connection to Henrietta, seeing her mother not just as a scientific specimen, but as a person who contributed immensely to medical science. Lengauer's lab is filled with researchers working on various projects, many of which involve HeLa cells. They explain how Henrietta's cells have been used to study everything from cancer to genetics to virology. For Deborah, this is a revelation. She begins to see her mother's contribution in a new light, understanding the global impact of HeLa cells. During the visit, Deborah is shown a freezer filled with vials of HeLa cells. Lengauer explains how the cells are stored and used for research. He also shares the importance of HeLa cells in scientific advancements and their role in saving lives. This information is overwhelming for Deborah, but it also fills her with a sense of pride. As Deborah continues her visit, she meets various scientists who share their gratitude for Henrietta's cells. They express how HeLa has been instrumental in their research and the development of new treatments. This acknowledgement is significant for Deborah, as it provides her with the recognition that her family had been seeking for years. One of the most poignant moments in the chapter is when Deborah is shown images of HeLa cells under a microscope. Seeing the cells that have lived on for decades, contributing to countless scientific breakthroughs, is a powerful experience. Deborah feels a mix of emotions: pride, sadness, and a sense of connection to her mother. Lengauer's kindness and genuine respect for Henrietta and her family have a profound impact on Deborah. He acknowledges the ethical issues surrounding the use of HeLa cells and expresses his commitment to honoring Henrietta's legacy. This reassurance is crucial for Deborah, as it helps her find some peace amidst the confusion and pain of her family's history. The chapter concludes with Deborah feeling a renewed sense of purpose. She is determined to continue learning about her mother and to share Henrietta's story with the world. Deborah's journey is a testament to her resilience and the enduring bond between mother and daughter. Her visit to Johns Hopkins marks a turning point, providing her with the answers she had been seeking and a sense of closure. In summary, the most critical time on this earth is a deeply emotional chapter that highlights Deborah Lacks's journey to understand her mother's legacy. Through her visit to Johns Hopkins, Deborah gains a deeper appreciation for Henrietta's contribution to science and finds the recognition her family had long been denied. This chapter underscores the human side of scientific progress and the importance of acknowledging the individuals behind the discoveries that shape our world. In September 1966, during a conference on cell culture in Bedford, Pennsylvania, a relatively unknown geneticist named Stanley Gartler made a shocking announcement that shook the scientific community to its core. Gartler stood before an audience of over 700 scientists, many of them leading figures in the field, and revealed that a significant portion of their work might be fundamentally flawed. He had discovered that 18 of the most commonly used cell cultures, believed to be from various tissues, all contained a rare genetic marker known as glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase a G6PDA. This marker is predominantly found in Black Americans, and Gartler pointed out that these cultures, purported to be from diverse sources, were actually contaminated with HeLa cells from Henrietta Lacks, a Black woman. The implications of Gartler's findings were staggering. HeLa cells were known to be incredibly robust and invasive, capable of traveling through the air on dust particles, hitching rides on researchers' coats and shoes, and even surviving in the ventilation systems of laboratories. Once a single HeLa cell found its way into a culture, it could take over, outcompeting and effectively erasing the original cells in the culture. This revelation meant that many scientists, who believed they were studying various distinct cell lines, were actually studying HeLa cells. Millions of dollars and countless hours of research could be rendered meaningless because the results were based on contaminated cultures. The audience's reaction was one of disbelief and anger. Years of research, careers, and reputations were suddenly at stake. Gartler's announcement was likened to dropping a bomb in the middle of the conference. The field of cell culture had exploded with growth since George Gay first cultured HeLa cells in the early 1950s, with the number of related publications tripling annually. The realization that HeLa contamination could invalidate much of this research was a devastating blow. Researchers had relied on the assumption that they were working with a variety of cell types, each with unique responses to drugs and conditions. Gartler's findings suggested otherwise, casting doubt on a significant portion of the scientific literature. Gartler's revelation also highlighted a critical issue in laboratory practices: the lack of adequate measures to prevent cross-contamination. While researchers were vigilant about bacterial and viral contamination, they were less prepared for the possibility of HeLa cells infiltrating their cultures. This was not just an issue of laboratory hygiene, it called into question the integrity of scientific findings across multiple fields. Despite the initial shock and resistance from the scientific community, Gartler's findings could not be ignored. They forced a re-evaluation of past research and led to stricter protocols to prevent contamination. The discovery also underscored the resilience and adaptability of HeLa cells, which had already contributed to numerous scientific breakthroughs, including the development of the polio vaccine. However, their invasive nature posed significant challenges for ongoing and future research. As the scientific community grappled with the implications of HeLa contamination, it became clear that the impact of Henrietta Lacks' cells extended far beyond their original contribution to medical science. The HeLa contamination crisis highlighted the interconnectedness of scientific research and the unforeseen consequences of relying on a single cell line. It also brought to light the ethical and procedural shortcomings in how cell cultures were managed and shared among researchers. In the wake of Gartler's announcement, efforts to identify and isolate truly unique cell lines intensified. Researchers developed new techniques and protocols to ensure the purity of their cultures, and the field gradually adapted to the reality that HeLa cells were both a boon and a challenge to scientific progress. This period marked a significant turning point in cell culture research, leading to greater scrutiny and more rigorous standards in laboratory practices. The HeLa bomb, as it came to be known, served as a sobering reminder of the complexities and interdependencies inherent in scientific research. It illustrated how a single discovery could ripple through the scientific community, prompting a reevaluation of accepted knowledge and practices. For Henrietta Lacks' cells, it was yet another chapter in their extraordinary story, one that continued to unfold in laboratories around the world, reshaping the landscape of biomedical research. Alright, so we're diving into this chapter called Night Doctors, which is a pretty intense exploration of the historical and ongoing fears and realities faced by the African American community when it comes to medical research. This chapter touches on some deep-seated fears and historical injustices that have contributed to a long-standing distrust of the medical system among Black Americans. So, picture this: it's New Year's Day, and Rebecca Skloot is waiting at the Baltimore Holiday Inn for Sonny Lacks, Henrietta Lacks' son, who's nearly 2 hours late. Just as she's about to give up, Sonny shows up, cheerful and friendly, teasing her for being so persistent. He's got this warm, open demeanor and quickly takes her to meet the rest of the Lacks family. This meeting is essential because Lawrence, another of Henrietta's sons, needs to give his approval before Rebecca can continue her interviews. Lawrence is the only one of Henrietta's children who remembers her, and he's considered the gatekeeper of the family story. As they drive through Baltimore, Sonny starts talking about his mother, Henrietta, sharing bits and pieces of what he knows. He speaks with a mix of reverence and casual familiarity, describing her as kind, a good cook, and someone who liked taking care of people. He also mentions the extraordinary reach of her cells, how they've been used in various scientific breakthroughs, which seems almost mystical to him. Then, the conversation shifts to the darker side of medical history, especially as it pertains to the African American community. Sonny and his siblings grew up hearing stories about Johns Hopkins Hospital and other institutions kidnapping Black people for medical experiments. These stories, while sometimes exaggerated, are rooted in very real historical practices. During the 1800s and early 1900s, Black bodies were often used for medical research without consent. There were tales of night doctors who would snatch Black people off the streets to use them for dissections and experiments. This fear wasn't unfounded. In the days of slavery, and even after, medical schools needed bodies for anatomical study, and Black bodies were disproportionately used. Often, these bodies were stolen from graves or acquired through other nefarious means. The idea of the night doctors became a part of Black folklore, a way to explain and cope with the very real threats and abuses they faced. Johns Hopkins Hospital, despite its mission to provide care for the poor, including the African American community, was not immune to these fears. The hospital's founder, Johns Hopkins, had intended for it to serve all people, regardless of race. He was a progressive figure for his time, advocating for the education and care of Black children. However, the hospital's location in a predominantly Black neighborhood, coupled with historical abuses in medical research, fueled suspicions that it was built there to have easy access to Black bodies. Rebecca learns that these fears are not just historical but continue to affect how the Lacks family views medical research. For instance, Deborah, Henrietta's daughter, is deeply mistrustful and fearful of what the researchers might have done to her mother and what they might be doing with her cells. This mistrust is compounded by stories like the Tuskegee syphilis study, where Black men were misled and left untreated to study the progression of syphilis. Such stories only deepen the suspicion and fear in the Black community towards the medical establishment. The chapter then delves into specific historical examples, like the grave-robbing practices to supply medical schools with cadavers. Black graves were often targeted because the bodies were seen as less likely to be claimed or missed. There was an entire underground industry that transported Black bodies from the South to medical schools in the North, often labeled as other goods to avoid detection. These practices contributed to a deeply ingrained mistrust of the medical system among Black Americans. This distrust was not without basis, as many early medical advancements and experiments were indeed carried out on Black bodies without consent. This legacy of exploitation and abuse has had a lasting impact on how Black communities interact with and view the healthcare system. Johns Hopkins himself was a complex figure. Born on a tobacco plantation, his family freed their slaves long before the Emancipation Proclamation. He became a wealthy businessman and used his fortune to establish the hospital with the aim of providing medical care to those who couldn't afford it, regardless of race. He also made provisions for the care and education of Black orphans, which was quite progressive for his time. Despite his good intentions, the hospital he founded became associated with the fears and realities of medical exploitation. Rebecca's exploration of these stories and histories is crucial because it frames the Lacks family's experience within a broader context of systemic racism and medical ethics. It shows how historical abuses have shaped contemporary attitudes and fears, which are not just relics of the past, but ongoing concerns that affect how people view medical research and treatment today. In the end, Night Doctors is not just about the Lacks family's specific fears, but about the broader, painful history of how Black Americans have been treated in the medical field. It's about understanding that these fears, while sometimes seen as irrational by outsiders, are deeply rooted in historical truths. This chapter helps to shed light on why trust in the medical system is still a significant issue and why stories like Henrietta Lacks's are so important for understanding the intersection of race, ethics, and science. Alright, let's get into this chapter called The Fame She So Richly Deserves. Imagine we're back in the early 1970s, and the scientific community is starting to really recognize the impact of HeLa cells. Henrietta Lacks's cells had already contributed to numerous breakthroughs, but for a long time, Henrietta herself remained unknown. This chapter delves into the beginning of the process that would bring her name into the light, highlighting the struggles, discoveries, and growing recognition that she so rightly deserved. So, during this time, there's this growing awareness among scientists that they need to know more about the person behind the HeLa cells. This isn't just about giving credit where it's due, it's also about understanding the ethical implications of using someone's cells without their knowledge. Remember, HeLa cells were taken from Henrietta without her or her family's consent, and this fact was becoming more and more significant as bioethics started gaining prominence in the scientific community. One of the pivotal moments in this chapter is the work of a geneticist named Howard Jones. Jones was one of the first to link the HeLa cells back to Henrietta Lacks publicly. He had been working at Hopkins and had a deep understanding of cervical cancer, which led him to Henrietta's case. He started piecing together her medical records and the story of her cells, which had been used extensively in research. His efforts marked the beginning of a movement towards recognizing Henrietta's contribution to science and medicine. As the recognition of HeLa cells' importance grew, so did the efforts to find out more about Henrietta herself. This included uncovering her medical history and understanding the conditions under which her cells were taken. There was a sense of urgency and a moral obligation among some scientists to correct the historical oversight and give Henrietta the recognition she deserved. This wasn't just a scientific issue, but a deeply human one. Around this time, journalists also began taking an interest in Henrietta's story. One of the key figures was Michael Rogers, a writer for Rolling Stone. Rogers's investigation brought Henrietta's story to a broader audience. He dug into the history of her cells, the ethical questions surrounding their use, and the impact on her family. His work was instrumental in bringing the story of Henrietta Lacks to the public eye, making people outside the scientific community aware of her contribution and the issues surrounding it. The chapter also touches on the Lacks family's reaction to this growing recognition. For years, they had been living in relative obscurity, unaware of the full extent of Henrietta's legacy. When they learned about how widespread the use of HeLa cells was, and how much money had been made from them, it was a mix of pride and anger. They were proud that their mother's cells had contributed to so many advancements, but angry and hurt that they had never been consulted or compensated. This newfound fame and recognition also brought about a sense of vindication for the family. They had long felt that Henrietta's story was being neglected, and now there was finally an acknowledgement of her importance. However, this was also a time of confusion and distress, as they grappled with the complex emotions of discovering that a part of their mother had been used in such a way without their knowledge. At this point, bioethics was becoming a significant field, and Henrietta's story played a crucial role in shaping discussions about informed consent and the rights of patients. The case of HeLa cells highlighted the need for ethical standards in medical research, ensuring that patients are fully informed and give their consent before their tissues are used for research. This was a major shift from the practices that were common when Henrietta's cells were first taken. The chapter also emphasizes the broader societal implications of Henrietta's story. It wasn't just about one woman and her cells, it was about how society treats its most vulnerable members, particularly people of color. Henrietta's case exposed deep-seated issues of racism and exploitation in the medical field. It was a stark reminder that scientific advancements often come at the expense of marginalized communities, and this needed to change. In essence, this chapter is about the beginning of Henrietta Lacks's journey from obscurity to recognition. It's about the scientific community starting to reckon with its past mistakes and making efforts to ensure that such an oversight wouldn't happen again. It's also about the Lacks family coming to terms with their mother's legacy and finding a sense of justice in the growing acknowledgement of her contribution. The title "The Fame She So Richly Deserves" is deeply fitting. Henrietta's cells had done so much for science and humanity, but for too long she had been an unsung hero. This chapter marks the turning point where her story starts to get the attention it deserves, setting the stage for further recognition and honoring the remarkable legacy of Henrietta Lacks. Let's dive into the chapter titled "It's Alive from the Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks." Imagine we're in the early 1970s, a period when the scientific community is just starting to grasp the full extent of HeLa cells' contributions and their implications. In this chapter, we get to see the beginnings of the recognition Henrietta Lacks deserved for her cell's contributions to science. The story kicks off with the news reaching Henrietta's family that her cells were not only still alive but had been used in countless scientific breakthroughs around the world. This revelation comes through a man named Bobette, Henrietta's daughter-in-law, who first learns about the cells during a casual conversation with a friend who worked in a lab. When the friend mentions HeLa cells, Bobette is stunned to learn that these cells came from her mother-in-law, Henrietta, and are still alive decades after her death. Bobette rushes to tell the family, and this news hits them like a ton of bricks. Imagine learning that a piece of your mother, who you thought was long gone, is still alive, and has been instrumental in scientific research globally. It's a mixture of shock, confusion, and a bit of anger because they had no idea. The Lacks family had lived in poverty, struggling with health issues and financial hardships, while the cells taken from Henrietta had been thriving and generating profits for scientists and companies. As the family grapples with this news, it brings a mix of pride and resentment. They're proud that Henrietta's cells have made such a significant impact on science and medicine, but they're also hurt and angry that they were kept in the dark about it for so long. The lack of consent and the absence of any benefits to the family from the commercial use of HeLa cells add to their feelings of betrayal. In the broader context, this chapter sheds light on the ethical issues surrounding the use of human tissues in research. Henrietta's case becomes a cornerstone for discussions about consent and the rights of patients. It forces the scientific community to confront the moral implications of using human cells without permission and the necessity of treating patients and their families with respect and transparency. Meanwhile, scientists are making groundbreaking discoveries using HeLa cells. They've been used to develop the polio vaccine, advance cancer research, and even contribute to our understanding of viruses. The cell's unique ability to reproduce indefinitely in lab conditions makes them invaluable for experiments that require large quantities of human cells. They've become a standard in laboratories around the world, often referred to as the first immortal human cells. This immortality, however, comes with its own set of problems, such as the contamination of other cell cultures, which was highlighted in the previous chapter. During this time, there's also a growing public awareness and interest in the story of HeLa cells. Journalists and writers begin to delve into Henrietta's story, trying to piece together the life of the woman behind the cells. This growing interest helps to humanize the scientific data, turning HeLa from just a name on a test tube to a person with a family and a story. One of the poignant moments in this chapter is the Lacks family's visit to Johns Hopkins. They're given a tour of the lab where Henrietta's cells were first cultured, and they see firsthand the impact of her cells. It's a surreal experience for them, mixing awe with a sense of injustice. They meet with scientists who explain the significance of HeLa cells, and the family starts to understand just how pivotal their mother's cells have been in the advancement of medical science. The scientists at Hopkins try to convey the importance of HeLa cells in layman's terms, showing the family the various ways Henrietta's cells have contributed to medical breakthroughs. This visit is both enlightening and distressing for the family. They're proud of their mother's contribution, but also deeply troubled by how they were left out of the narrative and the profits that came from it. The chapter also highlights the beginnings of a shift in scientific ethics. Henrietta's story becomes a catalyst for changes in how researchers handle human tissues. The importance of informed consent becomes a major topic of discussion, and regulations start to be put in place to ensure that patients are aware of and agree to how their tissues will be used. In essence, It's Alive is about awakening and recognition. It's the moment when the Lacks family starts to understand the monumental impact of Henrietta's cells, and the beginning of their quest for justice and recognition. This chapter is pivotal, because it marks the point where Henrietta Lacks begins to move from being an anonymous donor to a recognized figure in medical history. It's a story of discovery, not just for the family but for the scientific community and the public at large, bringing to light the human side of scientific advancements and the ethical considerations that must accompany them. The chapter is a mix of scientific wonder and personal pain, showing the dual-edged sword of scientific progress. It's a call for balance between scientific advancements and ethical practices, ensuring that the contributions of individuals like Henrietta Lacks are recognized and respected. This chapter is a crucial part of the ongoing story of HeLa cells, illustrating the need for transparency, respect, and fairness in the world of scientific research. Let's dive into the chapter Least They Can Do from the Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks and break it down as if we're just chatting about it. So imagine this, it's the mid-1970s, and the story of Henrietta Lacks's cells, the famous HeLa cells, is starting to gain some serious attention. By this point, HeLa cells have been around for over 2 decades, contributing to countless medical breakthroughs, but Henrietta's family is still struggling with the reality of what all this means for them. In this chapter, the Lacks family starts to come to grips with the fact that Henrietta's cells have not only survived but thrived in ways no one could have imagined. They've been used in research all over the world, leading to significant scientific advancements. However, the family hasn't seen any benefits from these contributions. They are still living in poverty, facing numerous health issues, and feeling the weight of being left out of the narrative that their mother's cells have helped create. The family's realization leads to a mix of emotions. There's a sense of pride in what Henrietta's cells have accomplished, but also a deep-seated anger and frustration at the lack of recognition and compensation. It's a classic story of exploitation, where the subjects of scientific breakthroughs, particularly those from marginalized communities, do not share in the rewards of the advancements their contributions have enabled. One of the key figures in this chapter is Deborah Lacks, Henrietta's daughter. Deborah is determined to learn more about her mother's legacy and what happened to her cells. She's driven by a need to understand and find some form of justice for her family. This journey isn't easy for Deborah. She faces numerous obstacles, including her own health issues and the emotional toll of uncovering painful truths about her mother's medical treatment and the subsequent use of her cells. The chapter highlights a pivotal moment when a group of scientists, aware of the ethical implications and the Lacks family's plight, decide to reach out. This is where we see a shift towards a more compassionate approach to scientific research. These scientists understand that while HeLa cells have been invaluable to science, there's a human story behind them that needs to be acknowledged. They arrange for the Lacks family to visit Johns Hopkins and see firsthand the impact of HeLa cells. This visit is both enlightening and heartbreaking. The family is taken through labs and shown the vast array of research that has been possible because of Henrietta's cells. They see how these cells have contributed to everything from cancer treatments to understanding human genetics. During this visit, the family's mixed emotions are palpable. There's a sense of awe at the scientific achievements made possible by their mother's cells, but also a profound sadness and anger at the lack of recognition and the ongoing struggles they face. The scientists try to convey their respect and gratitude, but it's clear that more needs to be done to address the injustices the family has endured. The chapter also touches on the broader implications of Henrietta's story for the scientific community. It becomes a catalyst for discussions about informed consent and the rights of patients. The case of HeLa cells highlights the need for transparency and ethical standards in medical research. Scientists and policymakers begin to recognize that patients should be fully informed and give their consent before their tissues are used for research. There's a poignant moment in the chapter when Deborah receives a book about HeLa cells. This book, intended as a gesture of goodwill, symbolizes the growing awareness and acknowledgement of Henrietta's contribution. However, it also underscores the gap between the recognition of the cells and the recognition of the person behind them. Deborah's quest for information and justice continues, driven by a deep desire to see her mother honored and her family's contributions acknowledged. The chapter wraps up with a sense of cautious optimism. The Lacks family's story is finally starting to be heard, and there's a growing movement within the scientific community to address the ethical issues raised by Henrietta's case. While there's still a long way to go, this chapter marks a turning point where the contributions of individuals like Henrietta Lacks are beginning to be recognized, and steps are being taken to ensure that such exploitation does not happen again. In essence, Least They Can Do is about justice and recognition. It's about the Lacks family's struggle to come to terms with the exploitation of their mother's cells and their fight for acknowledgement and compensation. It's a story of resilience and the beginning of a broader movement towards ethical standards in scientific research, ensuring that the contributions of all individuals are respected and honored. Alright, so let's dive into the chapter titled Who Told You You Could Sell My Spleen from the Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. This chapter deals with some pretty intense themes around the commercialization of human tissues and the ethical dilemmas that come with it. Imagine we're in the late 1970s to 1980s, a time when the Lacks family is becoming more aware of how widely HeLa cells have been used. They're grappling with the fact that Henrietta's cells have not only been crucial to scientific advancements, but have also become a profitable commodity. This realization leads to a lot of questions and a fair bit of anger. The title of the chapter itself, Who Told You You Could Sell My Spleen, comes from a court case that plays a central role in this part of the story. This case, Moore v. Regents of the University of California, involved a man named John Moore who discovered that his cells were being used for profitable medical research without his knowledge or consent. Moore had been treated for leukemia at the University of California, where doctors removed his spleen as part of his treatment. Unbeknownst to him, his spleen cells were later used to develop a valuable cell line. When Moore found out, he was outraged and sued the university, leading to a landmark legal case about the ownership and commercialization of human tissues. The court eventually ruled that once tissues are removed from your body, you no longer have control over them, meaning they can be used and even sold by researchers and companies without your permission or financial compensation. This ruling set a precedent that had significant implications for the Lacks family and anyone else whose cells might be used in research. Back to the Lacks family, they're dealing with the emotional and ethical fallout of discovering that Henrietta's cells have been commercialized. They're shocked to learn that companies have made millions off HeLa cells while they've received nothing. This disparity highlights the deep ethical issues surrounding consent and compensation in medical research. Deborah Lacks, Henrietta's daughter, is particularly affected by this. She feels a mix of betrayal, confusion, and anger. The chapter details her struggle to understand the legal and ethical aspects of her mother's case. She's haunted by questions about what was done to her mother and what continues to be done with her cells. This is a period of intense emotional turmoil for her, as she tries to come to terms with her mother's legacy and the injustices her family has faced. The chapter also explores the broader implications of the commercialization of human tissues. It's not just about the Lacks family or John Moore, it's about how society views and values human bodies. The legal and ethical debates sparked by these cases force the medical and scientific communities to confront uncomfortable questions about the rights of individuals versus the benefits of scientific progress. During this time, there's a growing public awareness about these issues. Journalists and activists begin to shine a light on the lack of informed consent in medical research, leading to increased scrutiny and calls for reform. This period marks a significant turning point in how medical research is conducted and how patients are treated. For the Lacks family, this chapter is a painful reminder of how they've been excluded from the narrative of scientific progress. They've seen how Henrietta's cells have contributed to countless medical breakthroughs, but they've also seen how they've been left out of the benefits and recognition. This exclusion adds to their sense of injustice and fuels their desire for acknowledgement and compensation. Deborah's journey is central to this chapter. Her determination to uncover the truth about her mother's cells and their impact on the world is both heartbreaking and inspiring. She battles her own health issues and personal struggles while trying to make sense of the complex legal and ethical landscape surrounding HeLa cells. Her quest is not just about seeking justice for her mother but also about finding a sense of closure and understanding for herself and her family. In essence, Who Told You You Could Sell My Spleen is about the intersection of science, ethics, and personal rights. It's about how the Lacks family, particularly Deborah, navigates the difficult terrain of medical ethics and commercialization. This chapter underscores the importance of informed consent and the need for ethical standards that respect the rights and dignity of individuals whose cells and tissues are used in research. The chapter ends on a note of unresolved tension, reflecting the ongoing struggle for justice and recognition faced by the Lacks family. It's a powerful reminder that while scientific advancements are crucial, they must be balanced with respect for the individuals who make them possible. The story of HeLa cells is not just a scientific saga, but also a deeply human one, fraught with ethical dilemmas and personal sacrifices. This chapter is a pivotal part of the larger narrative, illustrating the complexities of medical research and the importance of addressing the ethical issues that arise from it. It's a call to action for the scientific community to ensure that progress is made with integrity and respect for the individuals whose contributions drive it forward. Alright, let's dive into the chapter titled Breach of Privacy from the Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. This chapter really delves into the issues of privacy, consent, and the ethical treatment of personal and medical information, especially when it comes to the Lacks family. So, picture this, it's the early 1980s, and the scientific community is still buzzing with research involving HeLa cells. By now, Henrietta's cells have been instrumental in countless studies, but the story of her and her family remains largely untold and unknown to the public. The Lacks family, especially Deborah, Henrietta's daughter, is still trying to piece together what has happened with their mother's cells and what it means for them. In this chapter, a significant event occurs when the family discovers that detailed information about Henrietta's medical records and personal history has been published without their consent. This breach of privacy adds another layer of trauma and distrust to their already complicated relationship with the scientific community. The crux of this breach happens when a journalist, Michael Gold, writes a book titled A Conspiracy of Cells. In his book, Gold includes detailed descriptions of Henrietta's medical records, which he obtained from the researchers at Johns Hopkins. This book was published without any input or permission from the Lacks family. When the family discovers this, they are understandably outraged and deeply hurt. For them, this is not just a scientific curiosity, but the personal, intimate details of their mother's life and death being exposed to the world. Deborah, who has been on a quest to understand more about her mother and her cells, is particularly devastated by this invasion of privacy. She feels that her mother's dignity has been stripped away once again, and the family's suffering is being compounded by these public revelations. It's like their mother's story is being taken away from them, piece by piece, by outsiders who have no understanding of the personal and emotional impact. This breach also brings to light the ongoing issues of consent and ethical standards in medical research. The Lacks family's story is a powerful example of how individuals, especially those from marginalized communities, can be exploited by the medical and scientific establishments. The fact that Henrietta's cells were taken without her knowledge or consent is bad enough, but now her private medical information is being disclosed without any regard for her family's feelings or rights. The chapter delves into the broader implications of this breach. It raises important questions about who owns medical information and tissues once they are removed from a person's body. At this time, there are few regulations protecting patients' rights in this regard, and the Lacks family's experience highlights the need for stronger ethical guidelines and legal protections. As the family grapples with this new violation, Deborah becomes even more determined to fight for her mother's legacy and for their right to privacy. She starts to push back against the scientists and journalists who have taken so much from them without asking. Her quest becomes not just about understanding what happened to her mother's cells, but also about reclaiming their story and ensuring that their family's experience is acknowledged and respected. The chapter also highlights the broader societal issues at play. Henrietta's story is one of many where individuals from vulnerable communities are used by the scientific establishment without proper consent or recognition. The Lacks family's fight for justice is emblematic of a larger struggle for equity and respect in medical research. Throughout this chapter, we see the family, especially Deborah, dealing with the emotional toll of these repeated invasions of their privacy. They are not just fighting for recognition but also for their right to control their own narrative. It's a deeply personal battle, and it's clear that the impact of these breaches of privacy goes far beyond the scientific or medical realms. It touches on their identity, their dignity, and their right to be seen as more than just subjects of research. Breach of privacy is a poignant reminder of the human cost of scientific progress when it is pursued without regard for the individuals who make it possible. It calls for a reevaluation of how we treat patients and their families in the context of medical research and highlights the importance of consent, respect, and ethical standards. This chapter is a crucial part of the Lacks family's ongoing struggle for justice and recognition, and it underscores the need for changes in how we approach medical ethics and privacy. Alright, let's dive into the chapter titled The Secret of Immortality from the Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. This chapter is all about the fascinating scientific journey to understand why HeLa cells are immortal and the implications of that discovery. Imagine it's the mid-1980s, and scientists have been working with HeLa cells for over 3 decades. These cells are unique because they can divide indefinitely, which is unlike most human cells that can only divide a limited number of times before they die. The quest to uncover the secret behind this immortality is not just a scientific curiosity but a significant step in understanding cancer and other diseases. The chapter kicks off with a focus on the work of Dr. Harald Zerhausen, a German virologist who is determined to uncover the role of viruses in causing cancer. His research leads him to study the human papillomavirus HPV, which he suspects plays a crucial role in the development of cervical cancer. HPV is known to cause warts, but Zerhausen hypothesizes that it might also be involved in the transformation of normal cells into cancerous ones. Zerhausen's breakthrough comes when he discovers that specific strains of HPV are present in nearly all cervical cancer tissues. This finding is monumental because it establishes a direct link between HPV and cervical cancer, which means that preventing HPV infections could significantly reduce the incidence of cervical cancer. This discovery also explains why HeLa cells, derived from Henrietta Lacks' cervical cancer, are so robust and immortal they are infected with HPV. The chapter then shifts to the broader implications of this discovery. Understanding the role of HPV in cervical cancer opens up new avenues for prevention and treatment. It leads to the development of the HPV vaccine, which has the potential to save countless lives by preventing the virus that causes most cervical cancers. This is a significant public health advancement, and it all ties back to the HeLa cells and Henrietta Lacks. As the scientific community celebrates these breakthroughs, the Lacks family remains largely unaware of the full extent of their mother's contribution to science. They know that Henrietta's cells are important, but the details of how they've helped unlock the secrets of cancer and led to life-saving vaccines are not fully communicated to them. This lack of communication continues to fuel their frustration and sense of exclusion from the benefits of their mother's legacy. Deborah Lacks, in particular, struggles with the dichotomy of feeling proud of her mother's contribution while also feeling exploited and ignored. She is haunted by questions about what exactly happened to her mother and her cells. This chapter shows her continuing efforts to understand and gain some control over her mother's legacy. She reads everything she can find about HeLa cells and reaches out to scientists, trying to bridge the gap between her family's experiences and the scientific community. The chapter also touches on the broader ethical questions raised by the use of HeLa cells. The fact that Henrietta's cells were taken without her knowledge or consent continues to be a point of contention. The scientific advancements made possible by HeLa cells are undeniable, but they came at a significant ethical cost. This chapter emphasizes the need for ethical standards and informed consent in medical research, highlighting how Henrietta's case has become a catalyst for change in these areas. Moreover, the chapter delves into the scientific fascination with immortality. HeLa cells provide a unique window into understanding not just cancer but also the fundamental mechanisms of cellular aging and death. Researchers studying these cells hope to uncover secrets that could lead to new treatments for a variety of diseases, potentially extending human life and improving health in ways previously thought impossible. The Secret of Immortality is a fascinating exploration of how one woman's cells transformed our understanding of biology and medicine. It's a story of scientific curiosity, determination, and the relentless pursuit of knowledge. Yet, it's also a story of human struggle, ethical dilemmas, and the quest for justice and recognition. In the end, this chapter serves as a reminder of the incredible contributions that can come from unexpected places and the importance of recognizing and respecting the individuals behind these contributions. Henrietta Lacks' legacy is not just in the cells that bear her name but in the profound impact they have had on science and medicine, and in the ongoing efforts to ensure that her story is told and her family is honored. Alright, let's talk about the chapter titled After London from the Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. This chapter covers a significant period in the late 1990s, where Deborah Lacks, Henrietta's daughter, embarks on an emotional journey to learn more about her mother and the impact of HeLa cells. Imagine Deborah, who has lived with the heavy burden of her mother's legacy without fully understanding it, deciding to take a bold step towards uncovering the truth. She travels to London to attend a conference about Henrietta's cells. This trip is a monumental experience for her, filled with both excitement and anxiety. It's her first time traveling so far from home, and the significance of the conference is immense. Scientists from around the world gather to discuss the groundbreaking research made possible by HeLa cells. For Deborah, this is an opportunity to see firsthand how her mother's cells have contributed to science. In London, Deborah is treated with respect and admiration. The scientists she meets are eager to share their knowledge and express their gratitude for her mother's contribution. This recognition is a stark contrast to the neglect and exploitation the Lacks family has experienced for decades. The conference is a mix of scientific presentations and personal stories, highlighting both the technical aspects of HeLa research and the human side of Henrietta's legacy. After the conference, Deborah returns to the United States with a renewed sense of purpose. The experience in London has given her a glimpse into the vast impact of her mother's cells, but it has also intensified her need for answers and closure. She feels more determined than ever to uncover the full story of her mother's life and the use of her cells. Back home, Deborah continues her quest for information. She faces numerous challenges, including dealing with the complex emotions of her family and the bureaucratic obstacles of the medical and scientific communities. Despite these hurdles, she is relentless. She reaches out to researchers, historians, and journalists, seeking anyone who can provide more details about Henrietta and the HeLa cells. One of the pivotal moments in this chapter is when Deborah learns about a documentary being made about her mother. She is both thrilled and apprehensive about how her mother's story will be portrayed. This documentary represents a chance to set the record straight and give Henrietta the recognition she deserves. However, it also brings the fear of further exploitation and misrepresentation. Deborah's journey is not just about uncovering facts, it's also a deeply personal quest for healing and understanding. She wants to know who her mother was, beyond the cells that have become famous. This chapter delves into Deborah's inner world, exploring her thoughts, fears, and hopes. She grapples with feelings of pride for her mother's contributions and anger over the lack of consent and compensation. Throughout this chapter, we see Deborah's resilience and strength. She is driven by a desire to honor her mother and ensure that Henrietta's legacy is remembered with respect and dignity. Deborah's journey is a powerful reminder of the human cost behind scientific progress and the importance of ethical practices in research. After London is a chapter that highlights the transformative impact of knowledge and recognition. For Deborah, the trip to London is a turning point, giving her the courage and determination to continue her fight for justice. It's a story of empowerment, as Deborah takes control of her mother's narrative and demands the respect and recognition that has long been overdue. The chapter ends on a note of hope and determination. Deborah is more committed than ever to her cause, inspired by the scientists she met and the stories she heard in London. Her journey is far from over, but she is no longer alone. She has allies in the scientific community who understand the importance of her mother's contribution and are willing to support her quest for justice. In essence, After London is about the power of recognition and the importance of perseverance. It's a story of a daughter's love and a fight for dignity and respect. Deborah's journey is a testament to the enduring impact of Henrietta Lacks and a call to honor the individuals behind scientific discoveries. So, in the chapter A Village of Henrietta's, things start getting even more intriguing. Imagine the early 2000s and scientists are diving deep into the genetic mysteries of HeLa cells. They're not just interested in what these cells can do anymore, they want to know why they are so special. This chapter is all about the quest to uncover the genetic secrets of HeLa cells and how that impacts not just the scientific community but also the Lacks family. To set the stage, there's a significant moment where scientists discover that HeLa cells have unique properties that make them behave almost like a completely different species. These cells don't just multiply indefinitely, they also have an extraordinary ability to survive and adapt in ways that normal human cells can't. This discovery prompts researchers to dig into the genetic makeup of HeLa cells, trying to figure out what makes them tick. One of the most shocking revelations comes when scientists realize that HeLa cells contain a lot of genetic mutations. These mutations are part of what gives the cells their extraordinary resilience and immortality. But it's not just any mutations, it's a complex mix that includes the integration of HPV human papillomavirus DNA into Henrietta's genome. This integration is a critical factor in how her cancer cells became so aggressive and capable of endless division. Now, the chapter isn't just about the science. It also touches on the human element, particularly how these discoveries affect the Lacks family. For Deborah and her relatives, hearing that there are now countless Henriettas living in labs around the world is both awe-inspiring and deeply unsettling. It's like their mother is alive in 1,000 different forms, scattered across the globe. This realization brings up a mix of emotions: pride in what their mother's cells have accomplished, but also a sense of loss and confusion about what it all means for their family's legacy. The chapter also delves into the ethical implications of these scientific breakthroughs. The Lacks family learns that these genetic studies not only reveal secrets about HeLa cells, but also about their own genetic makeup. This raises serious privacy concerns. The family worries about what scientists might discover about their health and predispositions to certain diseases. They fear that these discoveries could be used against them, or that they could lose control over their genetic information. Deborah, in particular, is haunted by these possibilities. She becomes increasingly paranoid about the motives of scientists and the potential misuse of her family's genetic information. Her fears are not unfounded, given the history of exploitation that her family has experienced. This chapter really highlights the tension between the incredible scientific advancements made possible by HeLa cells and the personal and ethical dilemmas faced by the Lacks family. In the midst of these scientific and ethical debates, the Lacks family receives some good news. Efforts to acknowledge Henrietta's contribution to science are gaining momentum. Researchers and institutions begin to recognize the importance of giving credit to Henrietta Lacks, not just as a cell line but as a person. There are talks of memorials, scholarships, and other forms of recognition that aim to honor her legacy properly. This is a significant step toward addressing some of the injustices the family has faced. However, this chapter also underscores the fact that recognition alone isn't enough. The Lacks family continues to struggle with financial hardships and health issues, and they still feel that they've been left out of the benefits that have come from HeLa cells. The recognition is a positive step, but it doesn't fully compensate for the decades of exploitation and neglect. Village of Henriettas paints a vivid picture of a family caught between two worlds: the world of groundbreaking scientific research and the world of personal and ethical challenges. It's a story of discovery, not just for the scientists but for the Lacks family as well. They're learning more about their mother's cells and their own genetic legacy, but this knowledge comes with a heavy burden. This chapter is a poignant reminder of the complexities and consequences of scientific progress. It shows how one woman's cells have transformed the world of science, while also leaving a legacy of ethical dilemmas and personal struggles. For the Lacks family, it's a continuous journey of coming to terms with their mother's impact and fighting for their rightful place in the narrative of HeLa cells. In essence, A Village of Henriettas is a powerful exploration of the intersection between science and humanity. It's about understanding the incredible potential of scientific research while also grappling with the profound ethical questions it raises. It's a chapter that asks us to consider not just the scientific achievements made possible by HeLa cells but also the human stories behind those achievements. Alright, so let's dive into the chapter titled Zacharia, from the Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. This chapter centers on Zacharia, one of Henrietta's children, and it's a powerful exploration of his life, struggles, and the profound impact of his mother's legacy on him. Imagine Zacharia, born Joe Lacks, dealing with a lifetime of anger, pain, and confusion. His early life is marred by trauma. After Henrietta died, he and his siblings were raised by their cousin Ethel and her husband Galen. This was not a happy home. Ethel was particularly abusive towards Zacharia, which left deep scars on him. He grew up feeling neglected and mistreated, and these experiences shaped his outlook on life. Zacharia's story is one of immense suffering. He struggled in school, frequently getting into fights and eventually dropping out. His life took a darker turn as he got involved in criminal activities, which led to multiple incarcerations. During his time in prison, he converted to Islam and changed his name to Zacharia Bari Abdul Rahman. This conversion was a pivotal moment for him, providing a new identity and a sense of purpose, but it didn't erase the pain and anger that had accumulated over the years. One of the most striking aspects of Zacharia's story is his intense anger towards the scientists and doctors who used his mother's cells without consent. He feels a profound sense of injustice that his mother's contribution to science was recognized and celebrated, while his family lived in poverty and obscurity. For Zacharia, the immortality of HeLa cells is a constant reminder of his mother's suffering and the exploitation his family endured. The chapter delves into his complex emotions, showing a man who is deeply hurt and yet seeking some form of reconciliation. Zacharia's anger is not just directed at the scientific community but also at his own family and his circumstances. He feels abandoned and betrayed on multiple fronts, and this fuels his bitterness. Despite his anger, there's a part of Zacharia that yearns for understanding and connection. He agrees to meet Rebecca Skloot, the author, and through their conversations we get a glimpse of his vulnerability. Zacharia opens up about his feelings of being used and discarded, both by the system and by those around him. His interactions with Rebecca are tense, filled with distrust, but they also reveal his desperate need to be heard and acknowledged. Rebecca's presence provides a bridge between Zacharia and the scientific community. She listens to his stories, his grievances, and his perspectives, offering him a chance to express his pain. Through these conversations, Zacharia begins to find a voice for his frustrations. Rebecca's genuine interest in his story helps to validate his experiences, even if it doesn't fully heal the wounds. One of the poignant moments in this chapter is when Zacharia visits Johns Hopkins with Rebecca. This visit is charged with emotion. Zacharia confronts the place where his mother was treated and where her cells were taken. It's a confrontation with his past, filled with the ghosts of his mother's suffering and his own struggles. This visit is both cathartic and deeply painful for him, as it brings back memories of loss and abandonment. The chapter also touches on the broader themes of systemic racism and exploitation. Zacharia's life story is emblematic of the broader struggles faced by many African Americans, particularly in the context of medical research. His mother's cells were used for the advancement of science, but the benefits were not shared with her family. This chapter highlights the ethical and moral questions that arise from such exploitation. In essence, Zacharia is a chapter about pain, anger, and the quest for justice. It's about a man who has been deeply scarred by his past, struggling to make sense of his mother's legacy and his own place in the world. Zacharia's story is a powerful reminder of the human cost of scientific progress and the importance of recognizing and addressing the injustices that accompany it. This chapter doesn't provide easy answers or resolutions. Instead, it presents a raw and honest portrayal of Zacharia's life, his struggles, and his emotions. It's a story of survival and resilience, highlighting the need for empathy and understanding in the face of deep-seated pain and anger. Zacharia's journey is far from over. He continues to grapple with his past and his mother's legacy, seeking some form of closure and justice. This chapter is a crucial part of the broader narrative, showing the profound impact of Henrietta's cells on her family and the ongoing fight for recognition and justice. All right, picking up from where we left off with Zacharia, we dive into the next chapter, HeLa, Goddess of Death. This chapter delves into the broader cultural and scientific impact of HeLa cells, exploring how they've become almost mythic in their significance, while continuing to stir deep emotions within the Lacks family. So, after the intense personal revelations with Zacharia, we shift gears a bit to see how HeLa cells have transcended the boundaries of ordinary scientific discovery to become a symbol of immortality and power. The name HeLa itself evokes a kind of reverence and awe, as if these cells have a life and force of their own. It's almost as if Henrietta Lacks has become a deity through her cells, a goddess of both life and death, given how HeLa cells have been instrumental in saving lives, but also born from a deadly cancer. This chapter paints a picture of HeLa cells as a double-edged sword. On one side, they've been pivotal in numerous medical breakthroughs, from the polio vaccine to cancer treatments and beyond. Scientists marvel at their resilience and adaptability, qualities that make HeLa cells invaluable for research. They can survive almost anywhere, proliferate indefinitely, and provide consistent results, making them a staple in laboratories worldwide. It's no wonder they are seen as miraculous and somewhat mystical. But there's another side to this coin, which is the darker, more problematic aspects of HeLa cells' journey. The scientific community's fascination with these cells often overshadows the ethical and personal issues tied to their origin. Henrietta's story is one of exploitation and lack of consent, and her cell's widespread use without proper acknowledgement or compensation for her family continues to be a source of pain and controversy. In HeLa, Goddess of Death, we explore the cultural iconography surrounding HeLa cells. The chapter discusses how these cells have been depicted in various forms of media, from scientific journals to popular culture. They've become a symbol of immortality in a way that's almost poetic. Yet this immortality is rooted in the very real and tragic story of a woman whose life was cut short by cancer. This duality, immortality born from mortality, creates a powerful narrative that resonates on many levels. The Lacks family's reactions to this duality are mixed and deeply personal. For Deborah, Zacharia, and the rest of the family, HeLa cells represent a connection to their mother that is both profound and troubling. On one hand, they are proud that Henrietta's cells have had such a monumental impact. On the other hand, they struggle with the fact that this impact came at the expense of their own well-being and privacy. Deborah, especially, grapples with the idea of her mother as a goddess. She sees the reverence and respect given to HeLa cells in the scientific community and wonders why the same respect wasn't given to her family. This reverence feels hollow without proper recognition of Henrietta herself. Deborah's journey throughout this chapter is one of trying to reconcile these feelings, seeking ways to honor her mother's legacy while dealing with the ongoing pain and exploitation her family faces. The chapter also highlights some of the more tangible steps being taken to rectify these wrongs. Efforts to honor Henrietta Lacks more formally begin to take shape, including memorials, dedications, and increased awareness of her story in educational contexts. These steps are significant but still feel like small reparations compared to the vast influence HeLa cells have had globally. In the scientific realm, there's a growing acknowledgement of the ethical issues surrounding HeLa cells. Researchers and ethicists start to push for changes in how biological materials are obtained and used, advocating for more stringent consent processes and better communication with donors and their families. Henrietta's case becomes a cornerstone for these discussions, symbolizing the need for reform and greater ethical oversight in scientific research. Ultimately, HeLa, Goddess of Death, serves as a bridge between the personal and the universal. It ties together the immense scientific contributions of HeLa cells with the deeply personal story of the Lacks family, showing how one cannot be fully understood without the other. The chapter calls for a more holistic approach to scientific progress, one that respects and acknowledges the human stories behind the discoveries. This chapter, much like the cells it describes, is multifaceted. It's about science and progress, but it's also about humanity, ethics, and justice. The story of HeLa cells is not just a tale of immortal cells, but also a reminder of the mortal woman from whom they came and the family that continues to fight for her legacy. Alright, so following the journey we've been on with Zacharia and the exploration of HeLa cells as almost mythical entities in HeLa, Goddess of Death, we now turn to the chapter titled All That's My Mother. This chapter brings us closer to the heart of the Lacks family, focusing on their personal struggles and triumphs as they grapple with the legacy of Henrietta Lacks. Picture this: Deborah Lacks, filled with a mix of curiosity and determination, is on a mission to understand more about her mother and the cells that changed the world. She's been through so much discovering the impact of her mother's cells, facing the injustices her family endured, and dealing with her own health issues. But now, she's ready to dive deeper, seeking answers and connections that go beyond scientific facts and figures. Deborah's journey is both physical and emotional. She travels to various places, meets with researchers, and digs through archives, all in search of her mother's story. Her quest is driven by a deep need to connect with a woman she never really knew. It's a poignant exploration of identity and legacy, as Deborah tries to piece together the fragments of her mother's life. One of the key moments in this chapter is Deborah's visit to the National Foundation for Cancer Research. Here, she's given a tour of the labs where HeLa cells are used and meets the scientists who work with them daily. This visit is eye-opening for Deborah. She sees firsthand the enormity of her mother's contribution to science. It's one thing to hear about it, but seeing the cells under a microscope, watching them divide and thrive, is something else entirely. It's like witnessing a part of her mother alive and active in these tiny, powerful cells. During her visit, the scientists treat Deborah with great respect, explaining their work and expressing their gratitude for Henrietta's cells. This respect and acknowledgement mean a lot to Deborah. It's a stark contrast to the neglect and exploitation the family had experienced for so long. For Deborah, this recognition is a small but significant step towards honoring her mother's legacy. But the chapter doesn't just focus on the scientific side of things. It also delves into the personal impact of Henrietta's story on Deborah and her family. There's a beautiful, touching scene where Deborah goes through old photographs and records, trying to piece together a more personal narrative of her mother. She wants to know Henrietta as a person, not just as a source of immortal cells. This quest is deeply emotional, filled with moments of joy and sorrow as Deborah uncovers new details about her mother's life. The chapter also explores the broader implications of Deborah's journey. It's about more than just uncovering the past, it's about reclaiming a narrative that had been taken from her family. By learning more about her mother and the impact of HeLa cells, Deborah is also fighting for recognition and justice. She wants the world to know Henrietta's story, not just as a scientific marvel but as a human being whose life and legacy deserve respect and honor. Throughout this chapter we see Deborah's resilience and determination. She's faced numerous challenges, from health issues to institutional neglect, but she keeps pushing forward. Her journey is a testament to the power of perseverance and the importance of reclaiming one's story. It's a deeply moving narrative that highlights the human side of scientific discovery and the ongoing fight for ethical practices in research. In All That's My Mother, we also see the impact of Henrietta's story on the next generation of the Lacks family. Deborah's children and grandchildren are beginning to understand the significance of their grandmother's contribution. They're learning to take pride in her legacy while also grappling with the complex emotions it brings. This chapter shows the intergenerational impact of Henrietta's story, highlighting the importance of preserving and honoring family history. The chapter ends on a note of hope and determination. Deborah is more committed than ever to sharing her mother's story and fighting for her family's rights. Her journey is far from over, but she's made significant strides in reclaiming her mother's legacy. This chapter is a powerful reminder of the importance of remembering and honoring the individuals behind scientific advancements. It's about ensuring that their contributions are recognized and that their stories are told with dignity and respect. All That's My Mother is a beautifully woven narrative that brings together the personal and the scientific, the past and the present. It's a story of discovery, resilience, and the enduring power of a daughter's love for her mother. Through Deborah's journey, we see the profound impact of Henrietta Lacks's legacy and the ongoing fight to ensure that her story is remembered and honored. Alright, so we're picking up from the deeply personal and emotional journey of Deborah Lacks in All That's My Mother, and now we move into the chapter titled The Hospital for the Negro Insane. This chapter delves into some of the darkest aspects of the Lacks family's history, particularly focusing on Elsie Lacks, Henrietta's oldest daughter. To set the scene, we learn about Elsie, who was born with epilepsy and developmental disabilities. In the 1950s, resources and support for children with such conditions, especially African American children, were severely lacking. Elsie's challenges were compounded by the family's poverty and the limited understanding of her condition at the time. Elsie was eventually institutionalized at the Hospital for the Negro Insane, a state-run facility in Maryland. This decision was incredibly difficult for Henrietta and her family, but they believed it was the best option available given their circumstances. However, the conditions at the hospital were far from ideal, and the term insane in the name of the institution reflects the era's harsh and stigmatizing attitudes towards mental illness and developmental disabilities. The hospital itself was notorious for its poor treatment of patients. It was overcrowded, understaffed, and often subjected patients to inhumane conditions. The narrative of this chapter paints a grim picture of the institutional neglect and abuse that were common in such facilities. Patients like Elsie were often restrained, isolated, and deprived of proper medical care. The descriptions of the hospital's conditions are harrowing and highlight the systemic racism and neglect faced by African Americans in the medical system. Deborah, haunted by the fate of her sister, embarks on a quest to learn more about Elsie's time at the hospital. She uncovers medical records, photographs, and other documents that shed light on the tragic and painful experiences Elsie endured. One of the most poignant discoveries is a photograph of Elsie with her hands tied above her head, a clear indication of the physical restraints used in the hospital. This image deeply affects Deborah, fueling her anger and sorrow over the mistreatment of her sister. As Deborah digs deeper, she learns more about the historical context of the hospital. Established during an era of segregation and rampant discrimination, the Hospital for the Negro Insane was emblematic of the broader societal attitudes towards African Americans and those with mental illnesses. The chapter provides a stark reminder of how institutionalized racism and neglect have long impacted the most vulnerable members of society. The chapter also explores the broader implications of Elsie's story for the Lacks family. Elsie's institutionalization and subsequent death in the hospital left a lasting scar on the family. For Henrietta, it was a source of immense pain and guilt. She visited Elsie regularly until her own illness made it impossible. Elsie's plight was a silent burden carried by the family, a reminder of their powerlessness against a system that devalued their lives. Deborah's journey to uncover the truth about Elsie is part of her broader quest to understand her family's history and reclaim their narrative. It's a deeply personal mission, driven by love and a desire for justice. She confronts the painful realities of her sister's life and death, seeking to honor Elsie's memory and ensure that her story is told. This chapter, while somber, also highlights Deborah's resilience and determination. Despite the emotional toll, she perseveres in her search for the truth. Her efforts to uncover and document Elsie's story are a form of resistance against the erasure and neglect that have plagued her family for generations. It's a testament to the strength and courage required to confront and acknowledge painful histories. The Hospital for the Negro Insane is a powerful exploration of the intersection of race, disability, and medical ethics. It sheds light on the systemic injustices faced by African Americans and those with mental illnesses, emphasizing the need for historical reckoning and reform. Through Deborah's eyes, we see the personal impact of these broader social issues, making the chapter both a poignant personal narrative and a critical social commentary. In essence, this chapter continues the overarching theme of the book, highlighting the human stories behind scientific and medical advancements. It's a reminder that progress often comes at a significant human cost, and those costs must be acknowledged and addressed. For the Lacks family, and particularly for Deborah, this journey is about reclaiming their history and ensuring that the sacrifices and suffering of their loved ones are not forgotten. As we move forward, the chapter sets the stage for a deeper understanding of the Lacks family's struggles and the ongoing fight for recognition and justice. It's a somber but essential part of their story, adding depth and context to the narrative of Henrietta Lacks and the legacy of her immortal cells. Okay, let's continue the story and dive into the chapter titled The Medical Records from the Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. This chapter is a deep dive into the bureaucratic and emotional labyrinth that Deborah Lacks navigates to uncover her mother's medical history. Imagine Deborah, driven by a powerful mix of determination and desperation, as she pushes forward in her quest to learn everything she can about her mother, Henrietta Lacks. By this point, Deborah has been on a long and often painful journey of discovery. She's learned about her mother's cells, their impact on science, and the myriad ways her family has been overlooked and exploited. But there's one piece of the puzzle that has remained elusive: the full details of her mother's medical history. Deborah's quest leads her to the offices of Dr. Howard Jones, one of the doctors who treated Henrietta at Johns Hopkins. Dr. Jones, now retired, has kept meticulous records of his work, including the treatment of Henrietta. Meeting him is a significant moment for Deborah. She hopes that these records will provide answers and maybe even some closure. Dr. Jones is sympathetic to Deborah's quest. He understands the importance of these records not just for scientific history, but for the Lacks family's personal understanding of their matriarch. He shows Deborah the files he has kept, which include detailed notes about Henrietta's diagnosis, treatment, and the initial discovery of her cell's unique properties. Reading through these records is a gut-wrenching experience for Deborah. The clinical language of the medical files starkly contrasts with the personal and emotional weight of the content. She reads about her mother's pain, the progression of her illness, and the decisions made by the doctors. It's a painful reminder of the suffering Henrietta endured and the cold, impersonal way her condition was recorded. But there's more than just pain in these records. They also provide a deeper understanding of who Henrietta was and what she went through. For Deborah, it's a way to connect with her mother, to see her as more than just a patient or a source of immortal cells. It's a step towards humanizing Henrietta, reclaiming her story from the sterile world of medical research. As Deborah goes through these files, she also uncovers details about the early days of HeLa cells. She learns about the excitement and awe that surrounded their discovery, the initial tests, and the groundbreaking research they enabled. It's a bittersweet revelation on one hand. She's proud of her mother's contribution to science. On the other hand, she's reminded of the exploitation and lack of consent that tainted these achievements. This chapter also explores the broader implications of medical records and privacy. Deborah's journey highlights the tension between scientific progress and personal privacy. The detailed records kept by doctors and researchers are invaluable for scientific advancements, but they also contain deeply personal information. Deborah's struggle to access her mother's records underscores the importance of transparency and respect for patients' rights. In addition to providing a detailed account of Henrietta's medical history, these records also shed light on the early practices of tissue collection and research. They reveal a time when informed consent was not a standard practice, and patients, especially African Americans, were often treated as mere sources of biological material. This historical context is crucial for understanding the ethical breaches that have come to define Henrietta's story. Throughout this chapter, we see Deborah's resilience and strength. Despite the emotional toll, she perseveres in her quest for knowledge and justice. Her determination to understand her mother's history and reclaim her family's narrative is inspiring. It's a testament to her love for her mother and her commitment to ensuring that Henrietta's story is told with the dignity and respect it deserves. The medical records is a poignant exploration of the intersection between personal history and scientific progress. It highlights the importance of respecting and honoring the individuals behind medical advancements, ensuring that their contributions are recognized and their rights protected. For Deborah, uncovering her mother's medical history is a crucial step in reclaiming her family's story and fighting for justice. This chapter is a powerful reminder of the human stories behind scientific discoveries. It calls for a more ethical and compassionate approach to medical research, one that values and respects the individuals who make these advancements possible. Through Deborah's journey, we see the importance of transparency, consent, and the need to address the injustices of the past. In essence, the medical records continues the story of Deborah's quest for understanding and justice. It's a chapter filled with emotional revelations and hard truths, but it also carries a message of hope and determination. Deborah's journey is far from over, but with each step she moves closer to reclaiming her mother's legacy and ensuring that Henrietta Lacks is remembered not just for her cells, but for her humanity. Alright, let's pick up the story with the chapter titled Soul Cleansing. This chapter is one of those moments where everything becomes intensely personal and spiritual for Deborah Lacks. It's a deep dive into her quest, not just for information and justice, but for peace and understanding on a soul-deep level. Imagine Deborah, who has been through so much turmoil and pain in her journey to uncover the truth about her mother and her legacy. She's been on this relentless pursuit of knowledge, digging through medical records, meeting with scientists, and facing the grim realities of her family's past. But now, she's at a point where she needs something more than just facts and figures. She needs healing. The chapter starts with Deborah feeling an overwhelming need to cleanse her soul and find some peace. She's been carrying the weight of her family's history, the injustices they've faced, and the personal grief over her mother's story. This weight has taken a toll on her, both physically and emotionally. She's looking for a way to unburden herself, to find some kind of spiritual release. Deborah decides to turn to her faith for this healing. She seeks out a spiritual advisor, hoping that through prayer and guidance, she can find the peace she's been desperately searching for. The advisor helps her see that she needs to forgive both others and herself. This forgiveness is not just about letting go of anger, but about freeing herself from the pain and resentment that have been consuming her. One of the key moments in this chapter is a powerful scene where Deborah undergoes a spiritual cleansing ritual. This ritual is deeply symbolic and significant for her. It's a way of purging the negative emotions and finding a sense of renewal. During the ritual, Deborah feels a mix of emotions: relief, sadness, and a profound sense of connection to her mother. She feels as if she's finally able to let go of some of the pain and embrace the love and pride she has for Henrietta. As Deborah goes through this process, she reflects on her journey and the things she's learned. She thinks about the strength and resilience of her mother, the impact of HeLa cells on the world, and the ongoing struggle for justice and recognition. This reflection is both cathartic and empowering. It helps her see that while the fight is far from over, she has made significant strides in reclaiming her family's story and ensuring that her mother's legacy is honored. The chapter also explores the broader implications of Deborah's spiritual journey. It's not just about her personal healing, but about the healing of her entire family. By finding peace within herself, Deborah is able to bring a sense of calm and strength to her family. She becomes a source of support and inspiration, showing them that it's possible to find hope and healing even in the face of deep pain and injustice. Through this soul-cleansing process, Deborah also reconnects with her sense of purpose. She realizes that her fight for her mother's legacy is not just about correcting past wrongs but about creating a better future for her children and grandchildren. She wants to ensure that they grow up knowing their history and taking pride in their heritage. This renewed sense of purpose gives Deborah the strength to continue her journey with a clearer vision and a lighter heart. Soul Cleansing is a chapter that beautifully intertwines personal healing with a broader message of resilience and hope. It shows that the journey for justice and recognition is not just a battle against external forces, but also an internal struggle for peace and understanding. Deborah's story is a testament to the power of faith, forgiveness, and the enduring strength of the human spirit. As we move forward from this chapter, we see Deborah more determined than ever to honor her mother's legacy and fight for her family's rights. She's not just driven by anger or a sense of injustice, but by a deep, soulful connection to her mother and a renewed sense of purpose. This chapter is a powerful reminder that true healing comes from within, and that through faith and resilience, we can find the strength to overcome even the most profound challenges. In essence, Soul Cleansing is a transformative chapter in Deborah's journey. It's a moment of deep introspection and spiritual renewal that brings her closer to her mother and to herself. It's a testament to the healing power of faith and the unbreakable bond between a mother and her daughter, showing us that even in the darkest of times, there is always a path to light and healing. Alright, so after Deborah's deep and transformative experience in soul cleansing, we move into the chapter titled Heavenly Bodies. This chapter takes a fascinating turn as it delves into how Henrietta Lacks' cells ended up in outer space. Yes, outer space, this is where science fiction meets reality. Imagine this, it's the early days of space exploration, and scientists are eager to understand how human cells react to the conditions of space. They need a robust, resilient cell line to conduct their experiments, and what better candidate than HeLa cells? These cells, which have already proven their worth in countless research projects on Earth, are now set to embark on a new journey, one that takes them beyond our planet. In Heavenly Bodies, we learn about the various space missions that included HeLa cells. These missions were part of broader research aimed at understanding how space travel affects human biology. Scientists wanted to know how cells would behave in microgravity, whether they would mutate, and how they might respond to the unique stresses of space. HeLa cells, with their incredible durability and rapid division, were the perfect subjects for these studies. One of the key moments in this chapter is the description of how HeLa cells were prepared and sent into space. It's a meticulous process, involving special containers and careful handling to ensure that the cells remained viable during the journey. The excitement and anticipation of the scientists are palpable as they prepare to send a piece of Henrietta Lacks' legacy into the cosmos. The results of these space experiments were fascinating and groundbreaking. Scientists discovered that HeLa cells not only survived in space but also thrived. They grew faster and exhibited unique behaviors that were not observed on Earth. These findings had significant implications for space biology and medicine. They provided insights into how human cells might adapt to long-term space travel, paving the way for future missions and the potential for human colonization of other planets. But the chapter doesn't just focus on the scientific achievements, it also explores the symbolic and emotional aspects of sending HeLa cells into space. For the Lacks family, the idea that a part of Henrietta was floating in space was both awe-inspiring and surreal. It added another layer to Henrietta's already extraordinary legacy, transforming her into a figure of almost mythical proportions. Deborah, in particular, felt a profound connection to these missions. She saw them as a testament to her mother's enduring impact and a form of cosmic recognition of her contributions to science. Heavenly Bodies also touches on the broader ethical questions raised by these experiments. While the scientific community celebrated the achievements, there were still unresolved issues about consent and the use of Henrietta's cells without her family's knowledge. The chapter highlights the ongoing struggle for recognition and justice for the Lacks family, emphasizing that despite the remarkable scientific progress, there were still significant moral and ethical challenges to address. The chapter weaves together the excitement of scientific discovery with the personal and emotional journey of the Lacks family. It shows how Henrietta's cells have transcended the boundaries of Earth, becoming part of humanity's exploration of the final frontier. This celestial connection adds a new dimension to Henrietta's legacy, one that is both humbling and inspiring. In essence, Heavenly Bodies is a chapter that expands the narrative of Henrietta Lacks in a way that is almost otherworldly. It's about how her cells, taken without consent, have contributed to some of the most ambitious scientific endeavors of our time. It's a story of human ingenuity and the relentless pursuit of knowledge, but it's also a reminder of the ethical responsibilities that come with such progress. As we move forward from this chapter, we see a continuation of the themes of recognition and justice. The Lacks family's journey is far from over, but with each new discovery, Henrietta's story becomes more integral to the history of science. Heavenly Bodies encapsulates this duality, blending the marvels of space exploration with the poignant reality of a family's quest for acknowledgement and respect. It's a chapter that reminds us of the limitless potential of human cells and the enduring legacy of the woman from whom they came. Let's pick up where we left off, diving into the chapter Nothing to be Scared About from the Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. This chapter shifts the focus to a more introspective and reassuring narrative, dealing with the fears and anxieties surrounding the Lacks family's discovery of the widespread use of Henrietta's cells. Imagine the setting. Deborah and her cousin Gary are having a conversation. Gary, a deeply spiritual man, has always been a source of comfort and wisdom for Deborah. Throughout her journey, she has faced numerous fears about the unknown, about her mother's cells, and about the potential implications for her family. Gary, sensing her distress, decides to take a different approach to help her find peace. Gary starts by telling Deborah that there's nothing to be scared about. He explains that Henrietta's cells are a gift, not a curse. He draws on his faith and spirituality to frame the narrative in a way that is comforting and empowering. He suggests that Henrietta's cells are part of God's plan, and that they were meant to do great things in the world. This perspective helps Deborah see the situation in a new light, offering her a sense of solace and purpose. During their conversation, Gary performs a kind of spiritual cleansing ritual. He prays over Deborah, invoking a sense of divine protection and reassurance. This ritual is deeply moving for Deborah, as it helps her feel a connection not only to her mother but also to something greater than herself. It's a moment of spiritual healing, providing her with the strength and courage she needs to continue her journey. Gary's words and actions serve to demystify the scientific complexities that have been overwhelming Deborah. He breaks down the situation into terms that resonate with her faith and beliefs, making it more accessible and less intimidating. By framing Henrietta's cells as part of a divine plan, he helps Deborah find peace and acceptance. This perspective is crucial for Deborah, as it transforms her fear into something more manageable and even hopeful. The chapter also touches on the broader impact of this spiritual reassurance. Deborah begins to share this newfound perspective with the rest of the family, helping to alleviate some of their fears and anxieties as well. Gary's influence extends beyond just Deborah, providing a source of comfort and strength for the entire Lacks family. His approach highlights the importance of faith and spirituality in coping with complex and often frightening situations. Nothing to be Scared About is a chapter that beautifully blends the personal and the spiritual. It shows how Deborah's journey is not just about seeking justice and recognition, but also about finding peace within herself. Gary's wisdom and spiritual guidance play a crucial role in helping her achieve this inner peace. His reassurance that there's nothing to fear offers a powerful message of hope and resilience. The chapter also serves as a reminder of the importance of perspective. By shifting the narrative from one of fear and exploitation to one of divine purpose and strength, Gary helps Deborah reclaim a sense of agency and empowerment. This shift in perspective is transformative, allowing Deborah to move forward with a renewed sense of purpose and confidence. In essence, Nothing to be Scared About is about overcoming fear through faith and perspective. It's a story of spiritual healing and the power of belief in navigating complex and challenging situations. Through Gary's guidance, Deborah finds a way to reconcile her fears and embrace her mother's legacy with hope and strength. This chapter is a testament to the enduring power of faith and the importance of finding peace within oneself amidst life's trials and tribulations. Alright, let's take a deep breath and journey into the chapter titled The Long Road to Clover. This chapter is a profound exploration of legacy, roots, and the quest for personal and familial closure. It's about reconnecting with the past and understanding how it shapes the present and future. Imagine this: Deborah Lacks and Rebecca Skloot are on a road trip to Clover, Virginia. Clover is where Henrietta Lacks grew up, and it's a place filled with history, memories, and the echoes of a life long gone. This trip is not just a physical journey but an emotional pilgrimage for Deborah. She's driven by a need to see where her mother came from, to walk the same grounds, and perhaps find some answers that have eluded her for so long. The drive itself is symbolic of the long and often difficult journey Deborah has been on. As they travel through the countryside, Deborah reflects on everything she has learned about her mother, her cells, and the impact on her family. It's a journey filled with anticipation, anxiety, and a deep longing for connection. When they finally arrive in Clover, Deborah is overwhelmed by the sense of history and personal significance. Clover is a small, rural town, but for Deborah, it's the center of her family's story. She and Rebecca visit the old family home, now in ruins, and the cemetery where many of her relatives, including Henrietta, are buried. These sites are tangible links to her past, and they evoke a mix of emotions: grief for the loss, pride in her heritage, and a sense of peace from being in the place where it all began. One of the most poignant moments in this chapter is when Deborah and Rebecca visit the cemetery. Standing by her mother's grave, Deborah feels a profound connection to Henrietta. It's as if she can finally communicate with her mother, sharing her pain, her discoveries, and her hopes. This moment is a culmination of Deborah's long search for understanding and closure. It's deeply moving and cathartic, providing her with a sense of peace and resolution. In Clover, they also meet distant relatives and hear stories about Henrietta and the Lacks family. These stories add depth and richness to Deborah's understanding of her mother. They paint a picture of a vibrant, loving, and strong woman whose life, though cut short, left a lasting impact on everyone she touched. For Deborah, these stories are a precious gift, filling in the gaps and bringing her mother's memory to life. The chapter also highlights the stark contrast between the world Henrietta lived in and the world her cells have helped create. In Clover, life moves at a slower pace, and the struggles of the past are still very much present. It's a reminder of the systemic racism and economic hardships that have shaped the Lacks family's experiences. Yet there's also a sense of pride and resilience in this community, a testament to their strength and perseverance. Throughout the long road to Clover, we see Deborah's transformation. The trip to Clover is not just about finding answers but about healing and reclaiming her heritage. Deborah's journey is a powerful example of how understanding our roots can provide us with a stronger sense of identity and purpose. It's a reminder that our history, no matter how painful, is an integral part of who we are. Rebecca's role in this journey is also significant. She's not just a chronicler of the Lacks family's story, but a companion and support for Deborah. Through Rebecca's eyes, we see the profound impact of this journey on Deborah, and we gain a deeper appreciation for the personal and emotional dimensions of the story. The Long Road to Clover is a chapter about reconciliation and coming full circle. It's about acknowledging the past, honoring those who came before us, and finding peace in the knowledge that their legacy lives on. For Deborah, this trip to Clover is a turning point, a moment of clarity and resolution that allows her to move forward with a lighter heart and a deeper understanding of her mother's legacy. In essence, this chapter is a beautiful and poignant exploration of family, history, and the enduring quest for connection and closure. It's a reminder that no matter how far we travel, the road always leads us back to our roots, to the place where our story began. And in that place we can find the strength and wisdom to continue our journey, carrying the lessons of the past into the future.